Two pairs of legs walk down a cobblestone path as one person confirms the presence of a supposed witch. The other expresses disbelief that she is really here. An officer explains that the captive possessed invaluable healing abilities that aided the enemy's wounded during the war. He notes she was captured after the Battle of Relivra against the service army. Reflecting on her fate, someone remarks on her miserable end. After her defeat, she was easily offered up as a bargaining chip. Two uniformed men arrive at a doorway. The taller officer looks down quietly as his subordinate announces her presence. A close-up reveals a single, trembling eye welling with tears. The captive woman gazes forward through disheveled hair, her expression hollow and resigned. Bound in chains and wearing a ragged dress, she sits alone in a cold, stone cell. The tall officer gazes into the cell, observing the chained prisoner from behind. A close-up shows the officer's composed face, his eyes reflecting a hint of silent contemplation. The subordinate explains they kept her restrained even inside the cell as a precaution. He justifies the heavy shackles by noting they don't know if she is hiding other dangerous powers. The officer formally introduces himself as Albert von Service. He addresses the prisoner directly, calling her Sarah, the Witch of Relivra. Standing before the iron bars, Albert declares that as of today, it has been decided she will be under the care of his duchy. Sarah remains seated quietly on her stone bench. Lowering his gaze, Albert admits he cannot say much about the political situation. However, he earnestly promises her something important. He swears he will never harm her, just as he did back then. Internally, Sarah cynically assumes she will simply be used as a tool once again. The scene shifts to a grand, luxurious estate with expansive windows and elegant architecture. In a beautifully furnished room, a maid fawns over Sarah, exclaiming how stunningly a new dress suits her. Caught off guard by her own reflection, Sarah stammers in confused disbelief. The cheerful maid introduces herself as Emma and apologizes for the sudden intrusion. Emma admits she helped Sarah change into the beautiful gown without asking permission. Clasping Sarah's hands warmly, Emma promises to take good care of her. The maid enthusiastically encourages Lady Sarah to ask for anything she might need. Albert enters the room, causing Sarah to inwardly question why such luxurious hospitality is being offered to a former enemy. She reflects on how they recently belonged to warring nations. Emma proudly presents Sarah to Albert, asking if she doesn't look absolutely stunning. Albert stares at the transformed woman in silent thought. Standing nervously in her pristine dress, Sarah watches as Albert hums thoughtfully. Complimenting Emma's good job, Albert notes that the clothes suit Sarah perfectly. Confused and overwhelmed, Sarah desperately wonders why this person bothered to save her. She tries to puzzle out the hidden purpose behind all of this sudden kindness. Glancing down at her elegant attire, she feels these luxurious clothes don't suit her at all. She remains deeply suspicious of what they mean by all this. A flashback begins, recalling a time when Sarah was just a little girl. A voice screams at her, demanding to know what she is doing near a sleeping child. Young Sarah sits by her little brother Keith's bed, softly apologizing to her second mother. As a hand aggressively shoves her away, Sarah explains she only touched Keith because he seemed to be in pain. The second mother snatches Keith away, furiously reminding Sarah that their status is completely different. Spitting with rage, she warns the terrified girl to know her place, threatening never to forgive her if something happens to the boy. The woman sneers that she has no need for the first wife's daughter. She cruelly calls Sarah accursed because of her mismatched different-colored eyes. Sarah narrates that she was born into a noble family, but her real mother passed away shortly after giving birth. Her father's new wife despised her, treating her as an illegitimate child and labeling her a witch. Suddenly, the second mother notices that the baby's high fever from moments ago has completely vanished. She gasps in shock at the miraculous recovery. Clutching the child, the woman realizes he is completely healed. Her face contorts in stunned disbelief. Nearby, another child points in awe at a withered flower sitting in a vase. Sarah happily demonstrates her power, bringing the dead flower back to life between her small hands. Tears welling in her eyes, young Sarah desperately explains she did the same thing with Keith, hoping her healing magic would finally make her accepted. She pleads for them to feel reassured, just wishing for a little bit of affection. The second mother's mouth twists in horror as she tightly embraces Keith, horrified by Sarah's desperate desire to feel loved. The heavy iron bars of a prison cell violently slam shut, locking the little girl inside. Crying hysterically, Sarah begs her father to let her out of the cold, dark, and scary cell. From the other side of the bars, her father coldly replies that her power is far too dangerous. He explains that the king despises witches, and if her abilities are discovered, their entire family will be destroyed. He warns that witch hunts have become common, and powers like hers result in immediate execution. Sobbing against the bars, Sarah promises to be an obedient girl and swears she will never use her power again. Her father merely asks for forgiveness, refusing to yield. Walking away into the shadows with his wife, her father commands her to stay locked up until he decides her fate. Sarah stares after him in total despair. Through her streaming tears, Sarah suddenly hears a cruel, mocking scoff. Her stepmother bursts into a wicked, triumphant fit of laughter. Gloating outside the cell, the second mother confesses she has always hated Sarah so much. She expresses immense relief, calling this imprisonment the best thing that has ever happened. The stepmother reveals she always found Sarah terrifying, but now she has proof that the girl truly is a witch. Smiling maliciously, she celebrates finally being rid of the unwanted intruder in their family. Bidding the crying girl a final goodbye, the stepmother calls her a troublesome witch. Sarah collapses in breathless sobs. Left to rot in the dark, Sarah narrates how she was completely deprived of seeing her father or her brother, Keith. 3 agonizing years passed with her locked alone in that cell until her 10th year. Looking up from her miserable confinement, the young girl sees a mysterious figure approach. A gentle voice breaks the silence, stating it is an honor to finally meet her. A hand reaches out, inviting her to leave this terrible place together. The voice declares that they need her incredible power. A sharply drawn, intense eye gazes forward as fragmented characters float ominously in the periphery. A grim, sweeping recollection reveals that the narrator was once sold off to a ruthless merchant of death. This sinister figure built his dark, sprawling empire by trading in the devastating weapons of war. Astonished onlookers marvel at a brutal wound closing with impossible speed, loudly praising the miraculous healing ability on display. The narrator's solemn, exhausting duty was to use this extraordinary gift to mend the broken bodies of soldiers directly on the chaotic battlefield. Despite her life-saving miracles, the hardened soldiers whisper in dread about her terrifying, absolute silence. They aggressively shun her completely, convinced in their fearful ignorance that she is a malevolent, cursed witch. Recoiling in horror from her intense gaze, the frantic men warn each other not to approach the highly suspicious healer recklessly. They point to her striking heterochromia, eyes of wildly different colors, as undeniable, terrifying proof that she will curse them at any given moment. Burdened by endless, agonizing rejection, the narrator laments the relentless sorrow of her lonely existence. She wonders desperately why the sprawling world is perpetually drowning in such profound sadness and inescapable pain. In a bright, peaceful room, a cheerful maid named Emma suddenly turns to the narrator, Lady Sarah, with a bright spark of realization. Emma enthusiastically voices a lingering, deep curiosity she has harbored for a very long time. Startled by the sudden, intense attention, Sarah's uniquely mismatched eyes widen in clear apprehension. However, Emma merely observes with genuine, innocent fascination that having left and right eyes of different colors is an incredibly rare and unique trait. Realizing her disastrous mistake, Emma gasps in absolute, sheer horror as she notices Lady Sarah's careful makeup has severely smudged. Panicking wildly over the ruined disguise, the flustered maid cries out that the unexpected situation is a complete disaster. Overwhelmed by deep-seated, paralyzing shame, Lady Sarah hastily throws her hand over her exposed eye to desperately hide her perceived deformity. Trembling with overwhelming anxiety, she offers a frantic, heartfelt apology for her supposedly offensive appearance. Shrinking away from the perceived, crushing judgment, she tearfully begs the shocked maid not to look at her exposed face. Her fractured, racing thoughts swirl with intense self-disgust over what she genuinely believes to be a hideous, cursed trait. Suddenly, Lord Albert steps intimately close and gently cups Sarah's trembling face, staring intently into her mismatched eyes. He softly, earnestly murmurs that hiding such stunningly beautiful colors is a genuine, absolute shame. Completely stunned by his unexpected, profound tenderness, Sarah can only utter a bewildered, soft gasp. Looking down at her kindly, he warmly reassures her that in this grand sanctuary, there is absolutely no need to hide who she truly is. Breaking the thick emotional tension, Emma claps her hands together with infectious, joyful enthusiasm. She beams brightly, eager to completely remove the rest of the concealing makeup and celebrates Sarah's true face. Gazing upon Sarah's completely unhidden appearance, the energetic maid marvels loudly at the breathtaking sight. She passionately declares that the distinctly colored eyes sparkle brilliantly like magnificent, incredibly beautiful jewels. Bursting with fiercely loyal, protective energy, Emma pounds her chest and aggressively vows to be Sarah's steadfast protector. With a warm, comforting smile, she insists that Lady Sarah should never worry and must always share her deepest troubles without a moment's hesitation. Overwhelmed by the rushing, powerful tide of unfamiliar kindness, a deeply tearful Sarah touches her delicate collarbone in sheer disbelief. She silently reflects that these gentle, wholly accepting words are something no one in her entire, painful life has ever dared to say to her. Meeting Lord Albert's calm, unwaveringly steady gaze, Sarah stammers out a confused, hesitant question from the depths of her soul. She fundamentally struggles to comprehend the sudden, radiant warmth emanating from this powerful man. Gathering her fractured, desperate courage, Sarah explicitly reminds him that she is fundamentally a captive from a hostile, rival enemy nation. Bewildered by her current, luxurious reality, she desperately asks why he is showering her with such unearned, profound kindness. Albert pauses, his sharp, aristocratic profile illuminated as he considers his lack of true personal connection to the frightened woman before him. Raising a contemplative hand to his chin, he thoughtfully begins to explain his highly pragmatic reasoning. He reveals that his prestigious, wealthy ducal family officially sponsors a local hospital through their extensive charitable endeavors. Grounding his kindness in practical necessity, he explains that the brutal recent war has created a severe shortage of medical staff, making her miraculous skills incredibly valuable. Maintaining a highly logical, calculated facade, Albert explains that healing more patients directly boosts the hospital's public reputation, ultimately benefiting his family's political standing in many complex ways. Therefore, he formally requests her vital assistance, promising profound, lasting gratitude in return. Piercing her with an earnest, deeply expectant look, the young Duke point-blank asks if he can truly rely on her extraordinary, magical abilities. The heavy, life-altering question hangs thickly in the air, offering her a brand new, powerful purpose. Reflecting on the grim horrors of her dark past, Sarah shudders at the unknown torments she would have inevitably faced if she had remained a captive prisoner. A profound sense of fierce loyalty blooms within her as she realizes she only draws breath today because of this noble man's direct intervention. Surging with a newfound, fiercely burning determination, Sarah fully embraces her previously cursed magical abilities as a sacred, powerful gift. She finally sees a bright path forward, resolving to eagerly use her powers to repay the immense kindness she has been shown. A heavy, profoundly contemplative silence stretches infinitely between the two of them as they stand together in the ornate, softly lit room. The unspoken, invisible weight of their new, fragile pact binds them inextricably together. Breaking the quiet, suffocating tension, Lord Albert steps forward and hesitantly begins to voice a deeply hidden, secret desire. His usually composed, icy demeanor drastically falters as he clumsily attempts to share something highly personal. However, he abruptly stops himself, turning his broad shoulders away and nervously brushing off the half-formed thought as absolutely nothing. Left utterly confused by his sudden, jarring retraction, Sarah can only blink and wildly wonder what he had truly intended to say. Quickly pivoting back to his authoritative, commanding persona, he gently but firmly commands her to get some much-needed, deep rest. He solemnly promises that they will definitively table their complex, highly charged conversation for a more appropriate time. To ensure her absolute, unquestioned comfort, Albert completely assures her that he has explicitly ordered the entire staff to treat her with the utmost respect. He grants her unprecedented, sweeping liberty, stating she is entirely free to wander the grand mansion whenever she pleases. As Sarah silently agonizes over his aborted confession, Albert smoothly delegates her ongoing, daily care to the beaming, utterly reliable Emma. With his strict instructions clearly set, the busy Duke promptly takes his formal leave to attend to his pressing official duties. Later that night, a crisp, silver crescent moon hangs high and brilliant in the dark, hauntingly quiet sky. Wandering entirely alone in the stifling, oppressive quiet, Sarah lets out a soft, profoundly melancholy sigh. She realizes that, as always, her restless, deeply traumatized mind flatly refuses to let her find peaceful sleep. Staring into the oppressive, suffocating darkness, she bitterly acknowledges the harsh truth of her chronic, agonizing insomnia. She admits to her deeply weary self that surviving on fragmented hours of rest is a familiar suffering she is deeply used to. She bravely steps out of her room, venturing deep into the labyrinthine, grandly arched hallways of the slumbering, opulent estate. Overwhelmed by the echoing, profound silence, she marvels at just how incredibly vast and sprawling the opulent mansion truly is. A fierce flicker of anxious trepidation violently grips her as she genuinely fears she might get permanently lost within its massive walls. Suddenly, her sharp, mismatched eyes catch a faint, entirely unexpected glimmer in the thick dark. She stops absolutely dead in her tracks, her intense curiosity immediately piqued by the strange anomaly. Following the soft glow, she realizes she has wandered directly to Lord Albert's private quarters, completely shocked to find his lights still burning late into the night. She cautiously steps closer to the entrance, vividly recalling the exact directions the helpful Emma had given her earlier. Peeking nervously through the slight crack in the heavy door, an expression of deep, genuinely profound concern washes over her delicate features. Gently pushing the heavy door ajar as a cool, nocturnal breeze drifts past her, she intensely wonders if the overworked Duke has actually fallen asleep at his desk. She steps tentatively into the quiet, warmly lit sanctuary of his inner room. Steeling her trembling, highly frayed nerves, her vivid eye sharpens with sudden, bold resolve. She mentally clings desperately to his explicit, generous command that she was entirely free to wander the grand mansion as she pleased. Entering the spacious bedchamber, she immediately spots Lord Albert's exhausted form slumped heavily over his massive wooden desk. He is completely dead to the world, entirely surrounded by scattered, unfinished paperwork. Silently crossing the expansive, shadowy room, Sarah comes to stand directly over the deeply slumbering noble. Staring at his peaceful, unguarded face, a profound, crushing wave of raw gratitude washes over her. She solemnly reflects that this very man pulled her from the depths of a hellish prison where she had merely been waiting for the cold embrace of death. Studying the sharp, handsome lines of his sleeping face, a deep, highly unresolved mystery violently tugs at her racing heart. She desperately wonders who this fiercely kind, enigmatic person truly is beneath his perfectly noble exterior. Suddenly, Albert's brow furrows deeply, and a troubled, agonizingly pained expression twists his handsome features. Alarmed by his sudden, visceral distress, Sarah leans in much closer, frantically wondering if he is actually all right. Driven by pure, impulsive instinct, she slowly extends a trembling, highly delicate hand toward his bowed head. In a flash of startling, aggressive speed, Albert's eyes snap wide open, and he violently seizes her fragile wrist. Flustered and absolutely terrified by his highly aggressive reaction, she stammers out a frantic question, begging to know if he is delirious or in agonizing physical pain. She desperately tries to pull away from his iron grip, pleading to know if he is truly all right. Utterly panicked, Sarah blurts out a messy, desperate apology, crying out that she had only approached because she genuinely thought he was deeply asleep. Still severely disoriented, a wide-eyed Albert releases her wrist with a startled gasp, completely shocked by her unexpected, midnight presence in his private sanctuary. Blushing heavily and rubbing his ear, Albert stammers in awkward realization and quickly agrees with her assumption. Startled, Sarah asks if he has been experiencing this often, prompting Albert to rub his head and apologize for abruptly dozing off at his desk after failing to sleep. A heavy, awkward silence settles across the room as Sarah stands nervously before the seated Duke. Sweating with inner panic about what to say next, Sarah is suddenly rescued from her thoughts when Albert gently asks if she was also unable to sleep. She awkwardly confirms that her restlessness led her to wander the mansion, prompting Albert to kindly offer her a freshly prepared cup of tea. Waving her hands in frantic dismissal, Sarah insists she is perfectly fine and entirely used to surviving without sleep. Staring intently at her uniquely colored eyes, Albert expresses deep, genuine concern that her chronic insomnia will severely damage her health. Bringing a thoughtful hand to his mouth, the handsome Duke points out that they are both currently struggling with the exact same frustrating affliction. In a stunningly direct proposal, he calmly suggests that they should simply try to sleep together. He quickly rationalizes the shocking idea by explaining that sharing warmth and hearing another person's steady heartbeat greatly aids in deep relaxation. Flashing an earnest look, he suggests that spending an enjoyable night talking and getting to know each other will significantly strengthen their growing bond. his bold confidence slightly wavers as he hesitantly tacks on a polite request for her consent. Completely paralyzed by the overwhelming, intimate proposition, Sarah's mismatched eyes widen to massive proportions in sheer, unadulterated shock. Realizing his massive miscalculation, a wildly flustered Albert aggressively backpedals and frantically begs her to forget his completely inappropriate joke. Startling him mid-panic, Sarah timidly raises her voice and attempts to interject. A deeply blushing Albert interrupts with a barrage of messy apologies, confessing he only teased her out of a misguided desire to ease her heavy tension. Processing his clumsy but incredibly genuine attempt at comfort, Sarah's delicate profile softens with profound, silent understanding. Gathering her scattered courage once more, she softly calls out to him, immediately grabbing his full attention. Delivering a massive shock of her own, she innocently asks if he would genuinely like to share a bed with her after all. Sweating profusely and visibly trembling, the completely overwhelmed Duke desperately reminds her that his offer was merely a poorly timed joke. Gazing up at him with pure, unwavering sincerity, she firmly declares her deep, earnest desire to learn absolutely everything about him. Defeated by her blindingly pure innocence, Albert covers his flushed face with his hand and breathes out her name in an exasperated sigh. Attempting to instill some much-needed caution, he firmly explains that a man and a woman sharing a bed carries extremely deep, mature implications. Utterly oblivious to his mounting distress, Sarah tilts her head in genuine confusion and innocently asks what those deep meanings could possibly be. Pierced directly in the heart by her completely unblemished, worldly innocence, Albert finds himself entirely at a loss for words. Surrendering completely to the absurd situation, the two ultimately find themselves awkwardly settling into the massive, luxurious bed together. Lying stiffly beside her, a utterly defeated Albert fiercely defends his gentlemanly honor while exhaustedly lecturing her on the severe dangers of entering a man's bedroom. Peeking out from under the thick covers, Sarah timidly asks for permission to listen closely to his heartbeat. She earnestly explains that she merely wants to test his earlier, wild theory about heartbeats curing insomnia. Pushed entirely past his breaking point, a wildly flustered Albert thumps his broad chest and aggressively invites her to listen as much as she pleases. Gently resting her ear against his chest, she immediately picks up the rapid, incredibly forceful thudding of his racing heart. Deeply alarmed by his erratic pulse, she frantically asks if he is in physical pain or struggling to breathe, completely missing the romantic context. Assured of his safety, she finally relaxes her tense body completely against his solid, highly comforting warmth. Listening to the rhythmic, endlessly repeating thud, she marvels at the strange, undeniable proof of a living, breathing soul right beside her. She slowly closes her eyes as the profound, steady warmth completely overwhelms her deeply entrenched anxiety, filling her with unprecedented comfort. Drifting into a soft haze, she emotionally realizes she had absolutely no idea such peaceful, protective nights could even exist in her harsh world. Embracing the gentle dark, a fragile, entirely new flicker of genuine excitement for the coming tomorrow finally blooms within her chest. Sensing her steady breathing, Albert softly calls out her name, wondering if the miraculous comfort has finally claimed her. Confirming her deep slumber, he moves with extreme, tender care to gently pull the heavy blankets up over her fragile shoulders. Gazing affectionately at her peaceful face, he softly brushes a stray lock of hair away from her delicate features. Staring down at the woman who has completely upended his life, a complex, intensely emotional expression washes over his handsome face. He whispers a deeply cryptic question into the quiet night, hinting at a profound, highly hidden past they unknowingly share. The scene seamlessly shifts, plunging deep into the swirling, dramatic narrative of her highly tragic, persecuted past. Glowing, ethereal memory fragments float across the darkened room as her traumatic past begins to forcibly assert itself in her dreams. Despite the luxurious comfort of the Duke's bed, a subtle, deeply ingrained tension slowly creeps back into her resting features. Plunged into a horrific nightmare, she mentally screams in unbearable agony as the inescapable ghosts of her past ruthlessly haunt her mind. In the visceral, bloody dreamscape of the battlefield, desperate soldiers scream for doctors while she bitterly reflects on the devastating day she was sold into slavery. A severely wounded, terrified soldier suddenly locks eyes with her in the chaotic memory, his face dropping in absolute shock. Violently slapping her healing hand away, the panicked man aggressively accuses her of being a cursed witch and screams at her to stay back. Recoiling in absolute horror, the dying soldier viciously rejects her life-saving magic, leaving her completely isolated in a nightmare of pure rejection. The hooded girl trembled as she recalled the king's cruel decree that witches were cursed beings who brought only misery and destruction. She was haunted by the belief that even their children might pass these devastating curses onto innocent humans. Reeling from a harsh physical rejection, she staggered backward as a wounded person violently refused her help. The cruel exclamation that they didn't want to be healed by a witch cut her to the core. At that agonizing moment, the devastating realization washed over her that she was nothing more than a symbol of misfortune. She accepted the harsh, heartbreaking truth that she was truly a curse incarnate. Clutching her chest in anguish, she wept that she never chose or asked for this dreaded power. Her purest, most desperate wish was simply to help others and watch their stolen lives return to them. Trapped within the cold, unforgiving stone of a prison cell, the isolated girl stood quietly in her hooded cloak. A stern guard approached the heavy iron bars, gripping the handle to open her cage. Remaining silent in her captivity, she overheard the guards gossiping about the incredible news from the front lines. They proclaimed that, thanks entirely to the captive witch girl, the brutal tide of the war had finally turned in their favor. Staring blankly, she pondered how her power had become an indispensable necessity that restored mobility to the wounded, despite the king's burning hatred for witches. Yet, drowning in existential dread, she deeply questioned why she lived and what the true purpose of her tragic life was. A sudden fluttering sound echoed through the dreary silence of her cell. Distracted from her misery, she continued to agonize over why she was ever granted such a strange, alienating power. Startled by the unexpected noise, she looked toward the barred window of her gloomy prison. She gasped in mild surprise as she noticed a tiny bird resting on the cold stone sill. Observing the fragile creature writhing in agonizing pain, she realized it was severely injured. Driven by her innate compassion, she immediately resolved that she absolutely must help the helpless animal. Suddenly, haunting memories flashed in her mind, echoing the cruel voices that refused to let a witch treat them. The traumatic accusations that witches only spread curses paralyzed her with terrifying hesitation. Gazing sadly at the dying creature, she knew that leaving it alone would condemn it to certain death. Despite fearing the bird might hate her for using her magic, she ultimately couldn't ignore its desperate pain. Reaching out with trembling hands, she offered a heartbreaking apology to the tiny creature. She gently prepared to unleash the very power that the world so deeply despised. Holding the newly healed bird in her gentle palms, she softly announced that the miraculous treatment was completely done. Encouraging the tiny creature to fly again, she urged it to return to the boundless freedom of the sky. To her absolute bewilderment, the little bird simply hopped happily along her fingers and chirped instead of flying away. She stared at the tiny creature in profound confusion, uttering a quiet gasp of surprise. For some inexplicable and heartwarming reason, the small creature decided to stay faithfully by her side for a while. Ignoring the open window, the little bird stubbornly refused to fly away from its cursed savior. Cradling the tiny animal in her palm, a profound sense of peace washed over her weary soul. She gazed down at her new feathered companion with an expression of quiet, long-forgotten tenderness. Marveling at the fragile life in her hands, she softly noted what a remarkably small and gentle creature it truly was. A rare, genuine giggle escaped her lips as she found a fleeting moment of pure joy in the darkness. The radiant warmth of its tiny body resting in her hands sparked an emotion she had never truly felt before. Tears of genuine relief pricked her eyes as she finally experienced the beautiful sensation of sheer happiness. The fleeting illusion of peace was brutally shattered when the inevitable moment of departure finally arrived. The small bird suddenly took flight, darting rapidly toward the bright, open expanse beyond the iron bars. Pressing her face desperately against the cold iron grate, her eyes widened in panicked disbelief. She called out to the little bird, her voice trembling with the sudden, crushing weight of returning loneliness. Watching the tiny silhouette disappear into the blinding sunlight, a suffocating wave of despair gripped her fragile heart. She whispered a pathetic, useless plea for the creature to wait. Gripping the unforgiving metal bars until her knuckles turned white, her composure completely crumbled. She begged the empty sky, pleading desperately for her only friend not to go. A guttural cry of pure agony ripped from her throat as the paralyzing reality of her isolation set in. Tears streamed down her face as she shrieked for the bird not to leave her all alone. Startled by her sudden, frantic dash toward the window, The young guard aggressively demanded to know what was happening. Carrying a simple wooden bowl, he loudly announced that her miserable rations of food were finally here. Completely ignoring the guard's intrusion, she continued to sob uncontrollably toward the empty, uncaring sky. She pitifully begged for the little bird to come back and not leave her behind in the dark. Collapsing inward with devastating grief, she choked on her own tears as her spirit thoroughly broke. She wailed that she absolutely did not want to endure the agonizing torture of being alone ever again. Her agonizing cries triggered a fragmented, hazy memory of wandering alone through a dense, sun-dappled forest. The traumatic echoes of her past isolation forcefully bled into her current, overwhelming despair. A single, heavy tear traced a path down her pale cheek as the sheer magnitude of her trauma overwhelmed her senses. The deep, hollow emptiness in her wide eye reflected a soul that had been completely and utterly shattered. Deep within the murky recesses of her fractured memories, a dark, imposing silhouette of a man materialized amidst the towering trees. She stood completely frozen in the pouring rain, staring blankly at the ominous figure blocking her lonely path. Struggling to piece together the violently shattered fragments of her past, she confessed that she couldn't remember what happened after that mysterious encounter. A deep, lingering confusion clouded her weary mind as the dark memory suddenly faded to absolute black. Drifting into a troubled sleep, she clung to the faint, lingering feeling that she was genuinely happy during those fleeting moments with the bird. However, a heavy, unspoken sorrow continued to violently tear at the fragile edges of her exhausted subconscious. Her delicate eyelashes rested softly against her pale, tear-stained cheeks as she finally succumbed to the heavy exhaustion of her grief. The rhythmic, quiet rising and falling of her chest offered a brief, deceptive illusion of profound serenity. Suddenly, her long eyelashes fluttered as the heavy veil of deep slumber was abruptly lifted. Her vibrant eyes snapped open, violently thrusting her back into the confusing reality of the waking world. Blinking away the groggy remnants of her dreams, she found herself sitting up in a lavish, unfamiliar bed adorned with elegant curtains. To her complete shock, she looked down to see a handsome young man sleeping peacefully right beside her. Stirring from his own deep slumber, the young man slowly opened his eyes to find the enigmatic witch gazing intently down at him. A soft, breathless utterance escaped his lips as he found himself completely mesmerized by her striking proximity. Gazing warmly at the bewildered young man, her previously sorrowful features transformed into a breathtakingly soft and radiant expression. A gentle, affectionate smile graced her lips, completely erasing the tragic aura that usually surrounded her. His heart slammed violently against his ribs, his face flushing crimson as he internally panicked over the absurdly intimate situation. He was left completely stunned and incredibly flustered by the astonishing realization that the supposed witch had actually smiled at him. A tense, utterly bewildered silence stretched between them as they awkwardly stared at one another in the grand, luxurious bed. The sheer, undeniable reality that she had finally woke up in his personal chambers left him completely paralyzed. Out in the grand hallway, the frantic maid shrieked in absolute horror, demanding to know if Sarah had actually slept with the young lord. She aggressively questioned if it was truly possible that the girl had spent the entire night in Lord Albert's private room. Vigorously shaking the bewildered girl, Emma desperately interrogated Sarah to see if Lord Albert had done anything to her. Despite Sarah insisting that they literally just slept, the frantic maid strictly warned her that she absolutely mustn't go to men's rooms late at night. Pushing her absurdly protective warnings to the absolute limit, the terrified maid shrieked that mysterious men might literally eat her. Sarah recoiled in utter bewilderment, completely failing to understand the scandalous implication of being eaten. Blinking in absolute, innocent confusion, the naive witch genuinely struggled to process the maid's ridiculous and frantic warning. She tilted her head and earnestly asked how it was even physically possible for one human to eat another human. Sweating profusely at the girl's frustratingly literal interpretation, the highly flustered maid desperately tried to walk back her dramatic metaphor. She awkwardly backpedaled, stammering that it wasn't exactly like that in a literal, cannibalistic sense. Regaining her strict, maternal composure, the exasperated maid firmly delivered a serious lecture regarding proper aristocratic boundaries. She sternly declared that unless Sarah had a special relationship with a man, she absolutely shouldn't visit his room at night. While the naive witch silently wondered if a man eating a woman was just some bizarre tradition in the outside world, she earnestly apologized for her profound ignorance. The fiercely loyal maid sighed, promising she was only saying these intense things to protect Lady Sarah. Bowing her head in genuine shame, the sheltered girl offered a deep, heartfelt apology for causing such a dramatic misunderstanding. She softly lamented that she truly didn't understand anything about the complicated rules of this strange, unfamiliar world. Later, she approached Lord Albert to formally apologize for inappropriately visiting his private room late last night. Taken completely off guard by her sudden, intense formality, the confused young lord simply asked what she was apologizing for. While Albert gently reassured her with a blush that her nighttime visit absolutely wasn't a problem, she remained rigidly fixated on the maid's strict lecture. She earnestly explained that Emma had explicitly warned her that it was strictly not allowed to visit a man's room. Looking at the young lord with absolute, deadly seriousness, she revealed the terrifying core of Emma's frantic warning. She stated matter-of-factly that she must stay away because men might actually eat women. Believing that he had mercifully restrained himself from eating her last night, she earnestly apologized for putting him in such a difficult position. Shocked by her bizarre assumption, Albert frantically waved his hands and vehemently denied the entire concept. Processing her absurd conclusion, he sighed and realized that she had taken the maid's dramatic warning entirely too literally. Attempting to clear the air, he gently began to explain the true meaning behind a special relationship developing between a man and a woman. Suddenly overwhelmed by the intimate nature of the topic, he paused and awkwardly covered his mouth with his hand. Flustered, he quickly backed down, stating that it was still far too early for her to fully comprehend such a delicate conversation. Gently tilting her chin upward to meet his gaze, he softly affirmed that she would eventually understand when the time was right. Holding her close, he confessed that her incredibly straightforward nature honestly made him worry about her safety in certain situations. Her eyes widened with genuine remorse as she deeply apologized, feeling incredibly ashamed of her complete ignorance regarding the outside world. Offering a comforting pat on her head, he warmly reassured her that given her difficult past, her lack of knowledge was both natural and unavoidable. Continuing to gently stroke her hair, he promised that from this moment onward, she would have the chance to learn about so many wonderful new worlds. Looking deeply into her eyes, he warmly insisted that she should never hesitate to ask him whenever she encountered something confusing. Captivated by his overwhelming kindness, she simply stared up at him in a stunned, breathless silence. Expressing her deepest gratitude, she secretly marveled at his warmth and silently wondered why this person was treating her with such unprecedented kindness. Seizing the opportunity, she timidly raised her hand to ask a question, prompting him to cheerfully encourage her curiosity. Staring at him with utter innocence, she directly asked him to define what a special relationship between a man and a woman actually meant, instantly breaking his composure. Fidgeting slightly, she explained that while Emma had used the phrase, she truly could not grasp the concept of what made it so special. Crossing his arms with a heavy blush, he awkwardly stumbled over his words as he tried to figure out a clear, accurate way to explain such an intimate concept. She waited patiently for his answer, her large, innocent eye entirely devoid of any ulterior motives. Under the intense pressure of her unblinking, curious stare, he finally formulated a plan and excitedly pitched a new idea. Changing the subject to a practical demonstration, he politely extended his hand and asked if she would like to accompany him today. When she tilted her head and asked what a date was, he cheerfully explained that it simply meant going out together so he could personally show her around the city. Smiling warmly, he noted that experiencing the world outside might actually help her finally understand the true meaning of a special relationship. Radiating a brilliant, charming aura, he leaned in and sincerely confessed that he would be absolutely thrilled if she agreed to go with him. Completely dazzled by his enthusiastic request, she nervously stammered her agreement, which immediately sent him into a joyful frenzy to get ready. Standing before him in a beautiful new dress, she tentatively placed her trembling fingers into his palm as he politely asked for her hand. A breathtakingly tender smile graced his features as he gently guided his stunning companion toward their waiting transport. Stepping up into the luxurious horse-drawn carriage, she marveled internally at the surreal realization that she was finally experiencing her very first date. Arriving in the vibrant town square, the handsome noble and the mysterious girl from a hostile nation stood side by side like a truly striking couple. A sprawling, lively marketplace stretched out before them, completely packed with bustling vendor stalls and eager crowds. Strolling through the cobblestone streets, they were surrounded by the lively chatter of townsfolk and the charming architecture of the busy city. The cheerful sounds of booming laughter and lively haggling echoed all around them as families and merchants enjoyed the beautiful day. Standing closely beside her elegant escort, she quietly observed the bustling, unfamiliar slice of peaceful civilian life. Staring in absolute awe at the crowds, she whispered how lively everything was, to which he proudly confirmed it was the busiest town in the entire country. Watching the citizens go about their day, he warmly confessed that witnessing their vibrant, everyday lives always filled him with energy too. Turning his gentle gaze toward her, he admitted that he specifically brought her here because he truly believed she would love seeing it. Gazing up at his radiant profile, she was entirely captivated by the profound realization that he looked genuinely, deeply happy in this environment. Leaning in close, Albert playfully declared that he intended to escort her properly on their precious date, completely ignoring a surprised shopkeeper observing them nearby. The cheerful, mustached shopkeeper stepped forward, warmly greeting the young master and noting how long it had been since his last visit. Politely acknowledging the merchant, Albert turned and formally introduced Sarah to the owner of the confectionery shop, explaining he was a long-time family supplier. The boisterous shopkeeper leaned in to inspect the young lady, throwing up an enthusiastic thumbs up as he prepared to tease the nobleman. Shrinking back from the sudden, overwhelming attention, she panicked internally, terrified that the stranger would notice her cursed, unnatural eyes. Oblivious to her fear, the loud merchant slapped Albert's shoulder, loudly teasing the young master about bringing yet another beautiful girl around while warning him not to play with fire. Horrified by the implication, Albert immediately lunged forward with a panicked shout, thrusting his hand directly into the merchant's face to shut him up. While Sarah stared in absolute bewilderment, an intensely sweating Albert furiously whispered for the shopkeeper to stop talking because she knew absolutely nothing about his scandalous past behavior. Whirling back around with a highly suspicious smile, Albert nervously lied, loudly declaring that he was merely praising the merchant's exquisite sweets. Eager to escape the incredibly awkward situation, he hastily extended 2 fingers toward her and practically begged her to leave with him. Still slightly confused but willing to follow, she softly agreed and gently grasped his waiting fingers. As he led her away from the chaotic storefront, she silently marveled at how incredibly warm and comforting the young lord's hand felt against hers. A delicate, nervous blush crept across her cheeks as a soft, uncertain murmur escaped her lips, completely overwhelmed by the novel experience of holding hands. Breaking the tense silence, a voice asks what is wrong, prompting the other person to hesitantly admit they have a question. Sarah wonders why the people here aren't afraid of witches, noting that even Lord Albert, Emma, and the shopkeeper didn't seem surprised when looking into her eyes. Lord Albert apologizes for keeping her in the dark, explaining that in his country, witches are simply not subject to any criticism. Pointing to a woman running a pharmacy, he shocks Sarah by revealing that the shopkeeper is also a witch selling her own homemade medicine. He continues his explanation, noting that there are even witches who teach magic as a respected academic subject. Furthermore, he adds that witches possessing the power of foresight often make a comfortable living through fortune-telling. Contrasting his homeland's broad definition of a witch with her own country, he acknowledges that such people might have been considered heretics where she came from. Flashing a comforting smile, he assures Sarah that she can finally let her guard down and feel at ease here. Overwhelmed by this new reality, Sarah admits she could never have even imagined such a peaceful existence before now. He gently promises that she will gradually get used to it, leaving her feeling strange but undeniably relieved. Overcome with emotion from his accepting words, Sarah quietly brings her hands to her face to wipe away tears of relief. Quickly changing the mood, Albert excitedly encourages Sarah to look around so they can have fun today. The bustling city streets unfold before them, filled with vibrant market stalls and towering buildings under the bright sky. Exploring a quaint boutique, Albert playfully places a stylish, wide-brimmed hat on Sarah's head while she looks on in pleasant surprise. The pair happily share some brightly decorated sweets, with Albert smiling warmly as Sarah stares at her dessert in awe. Later on, they admire a majestic windmill together as delicate flower petals drift gently on the passing breeze. Their peaceful stroll is suddenly interrupted when a familiar voice calls out Lord Albert's name from across the street. A sophisticated woman approaches them, noting with a forced, overly sweet smile that Albert seems to be having a lot of fun. Caught completely off guard, Albert awkwardly apologizes and admits he simply got carried away on his rare day off. Attempting to deflect the growing tension, he turns to Sarah and asks if she is tired and wants to take a break, though she insists she is fine. He excitedly suggests heading to a nearby shop known for delicious tea and cakes, instantly piquing Sarah's interest. Unamused by his attempt to ignore her, the elegant woman clicks her tongue in visible, sharp annoyance. Stepping fully into their conversation, the woman greets him with a mockingly polite, "Good day," and notes just how long it has been since they last saw each other. Maintaining her unsettling composure, she smoothly asks how he has been doing all this time. Albert stares back in stunned, uncomfortable silence, a single bead of sweat forming on his tense face. Finally recovering a fraction of his composure, he stammers out a weak greeting and awkwardly acknowledges that it has indeed been a while. The heavy tension between them thickens as the woman continues to stare him down without breaking eye contact. As she pointedly asks if his family is doing well, Albert rubs his neck and weakly apologizes for being too busy with various things to keep in touch. Balling his hand into a tight fist, he braces himself as she completely rejects his flimsy excuse. Desperately trying to explain himself, he trails off while addressing the intimidating woman directly as Layla. Cutting him off completely, Layla dramatically tilts her head and asks if he has somehow managed to forget about her. Albert looks away in deep guilt, quietly denying her accusation while stammering out yet another pathetic apology. Layla sighs dramatically, bringing up the swirling rumors she heard about him spending his time with various different women. Leaning in closer with a bitter expression, she aggressively demands to know if she simply wasn't good enough for him. Her voice dropping to a dark warning, she tells him that playing with fire is something that should only be done in strict moderation. Panicking at her implications, Albert immediately stammers and tries to defend Sarah to clear up the dangerous misunderstanding. Layla merely clicks her tongue again in disgust, shifting her sharp, calculating glare directly onto the silent Sarah. Feigning absolute politeness, Layla sarcastically apologizes for being so terrible as to intrude on their precious time together. When Layla pointedly demands to know her name, Sarah timidly introduces herself under the woman's intense scrutiny. Assuming Sarah must be a noble, Layla steps uncomfortably close and practically demands to be her friend since she claims not to have many. Gripping Sarah's hand with painful, crushing force, Layla forces a manic smile and insists she would be absolutely thrilled if they could be friends. Suddenly releasing her iron grip, Layla issues a fake apology and giggles maliciously at Sarah's obvious discomfort. Leaving Sarah deeply confused and nursing her aching hand, Layla formally announces that she shall now take her leave. With a final, menacing glare over her shoulder, Layla coldly states that she is looking forward to the day they meet again. Bidding them a final, chilling goodbye, Layla turns and walks away, leaving a heavily shaken Sarah in her wake. Noticing Sarah's trembling form, Albert quickly turns his attention back to her and urgently asks if she is okay. Still shivering from the encounter, Sarah internally questions why this strange woman directed such blatant, terrifying hostility toward her. Completely oblivious to the physical pain Layla just caused, Albert apologizes profusely, stating he only ever wanted Sarah to have a good time today. Looking utterly defeated and miserable, he takes full blame for ruining the peaceful mood of their once perfect date. Clutching her chest in lingering shock, Sarah looks up at the guilt-ridden Albert in concerned, heavy silence. Clutching his chest in a sudden, alarming fit, Albert brings his trembling hand to his face as a sharp, unexpected wave of pain washes over his usually composed features. Noticing his sudden discomfort, an alarmed Sarah immediately rushes closer, noting that he looks like he is in deep pain and desperately demanding to know where it hurts so she can help. Reaching out with gentle, trembling hands, she softly cups his face and earnestly asks if she can use her abilities to heal him. Quickly recovering his composure, Albert gently holds her wrists and reassures her that his health is perfectly fine, sincerely thanking her for her deep concern while she breathes a heavy sigh of relief. A warm, tender chuckle escapes Albert's lips as he looks down at her lingering confusion, clearly touched by her immediate panic. With a fond smile, he notes that she tends to worry far too much about others, prompting a flustered Sarah to quickly apologize for her overreaction. Gazing deeply into her eyes, a profound sense of quiet affection and unspoken gratitude reflects vividly in his unwavering, tender stare. Breaking the intimate silence with a gentle rustle, he suddenly presents a single, beautifully bloomed flower right in front of her face. Placing the delicate flower gently in her bright hair, he softly murmurs that she is always stepping up and helping him when he needs it most. Blushing furiously at the sudden romantic gesture, Sarah gasps in surprise as he warmly compliments how perfectly the vibrant flower suits her. Revealing an even larger, meticulously arranged bouquet of gorgeous blossoms, He bashfully admits he secretly bought it for her earlier during their stroll. Utterly overwhelmed by the beautiful, unexpected gift, Sarah stammers in speechless awe as the lovely bouquet rests delicately in her arms. While Albert awkwardly apologizes for the bouquet being so small, a deeply moved Sarah reveals that this is the very first time she has ever received flowers from anyone. Her eyes widening with overwhelming, sparkling emotion, she struggles to articulate the profound feeling swelling in her chest, whispering that experiencing this kind of thing is somehow completely new and magical to her. Smiling radiantly with tears of pure joy brimming in her eyes, she clutches the beautiful flowers to her chest and declares that receiving them is a truly happy thing. Thoroughly enchanted by her breathtakingly cute expression, a deeply flustered Albert clicks his tongue to hide his intense embarrassment as Sarah sincerely thanks him for the wonderful gift. Shaking off his heavy blush, Albert loudly declares that they need to pull themselves together and confidently leads the way through the bustling city square. As the happy couple walks away arm in arm, a sinister, shadowed figure lurks quietly in the background, watching their every move with seething, undeniable intent. Biting her fingernail in unhinged, silent fury, the elegant woman from earlier glares daggers at their retreating backs, her eyes practically burning with dark, obsessive malice. The narrative dramatically shifts, presenting the title of Chapter 34 and promising a deep dive into the complex happiness and bitter rivalries brewing on the horizon. Transitioning into a dark recollection, Layla stews in her obsessive, unrequited love, frustrated by how the Duke of an enemy nation somehow dotes entirely on a supposedly abused young woman. Flashing back to her grand debut in high society, a younger Layla formally encounters Duke Albert for the very first time, noting his prestigious status as the brilliant, highly promising successor to the Service Duchy who excels in both diplomacy and warfare. Eager to rapidly secure their political power, her calculating family relentlessly pressures her to use her cute charms to win the noble heir over and form an unbreakable alliance with the Service family. Feeling utterly exhausted by the endless, boring political and economic chatter, Layla initially views these high society events as nothing more than a suffocating, tedious chore. Despite her family's highly ambitious demands, she privately scoffs at the absurd idea of marrying him, believing that the massive gap in their social statuses makes any romantic connection completely impossible. Suddenly breaking through her cynical thoughts, a charming Albert approaches her, politely introducing himself and graciously acknowledging the deep kindness her father, Count Rowan, has always shown him. Completely caught off guard by his sudden appearance and his incredibly overwhelming presence, Layla stammers out a weak gasp as her eyes widen in sheer shock. Panicking under his gentle, piercing gaze, she fumbles her words terribly, awkwardly blurting out her name while desperately trying to express that it is a profound pleasure to meet him. Mortified by her own intensely clumsy introduction, she mentally berates herself for acting like a fool, utterly terrified that the prestigious Duke is going to laugh at her or mock her severe awkwardness. Instead of mocking her, Albert offers an exceptionally warm, understanding smile and sincerely apologizes for startling her, gently noting that he heard this is her very first time attending such intimidating high society events. Startled by his completely unexpected empathy and his total lack of judgment, Layla simply stares back in quiet, breathless disbelief. Continuing his remarkably gentle and patient approach, Albert politely asks if he can see her hand for just a brief, passing moment. Still thoroughly entranced by his incredibly smooth demeanor, a heavily blushing Layla hesitantly offers her trembling hand to him. Pressing softly into the delicate center of her palm, Albert kindly explains that applying pressure to this specific spot will immediately help ease her crippling nervous tension. Staring up at his handsome face in a complete romantic daze, a highly flustered Layla questions what this overwhelming, heart-fluttering feeling blooming inside her chest could possibly be. Offering her one last dazzling, confident smile, Albert remarks that she is exactly as beautiful and wonderful as her proud father had described her to be. Gripped by a sudden, intense infatuation, Layla gazes up at him with brightly flushed cheeks, utterly captivated by his true beauty and his undeniable, magnetic charm. The magical moment abruptly shatters when another nobleman approaches, prompting Albert to quickly pardon himself and respectfully take his leave from the love-struck Layla. Bowing his head with perfect, practiced courtesy, he bids her a polite goodbye and sincerely hopes she enjoys the rest of her debut evening. Layla watches in longing, breathless silence as the dashing Duke turns his broad back and gracefully strides away into the crowded ballroom, leaving an indelible mark on her heart. Her heart pounding wildly in her chest with loud, rhythmic thumps, Layla stands completely paralyzed by the overwhelming weight of her sudden, deeply obsessive first love. The romantic flashback twists into a violently bitter memory as Layla recalls desperately begging her father to arrange an official date with the Duke, hoping to finally secure his undivided affections. Her fond memories instantly curdle into raw, venomous hatred as she remembers that on their hard-won date, Albert completely forgot who she was and brutally shattered her heart by calling her by another woman's name. Snapping back to the harsh present reality, Layla glares intensely at the back of Sarah's head, viciously concluding that this seemingly quiet, unassuming girl must have forcefully seduced Lord Albert to gain his favor. Gnawing aggressively on her thumbnail, Layla descends into a dark spiral of twisted jealousy, questioning why things turned out this way and fiercely swearing she will never forgive Sarah for stealing her prize. Her face contorting into a terrifying, shadow-drenched mask of pure malice, she locks her crazed, unwavering glare onto her perceived rival with deadly, unforgiving intent. As Layla's dark aura practically engulfs the street behind them in a wave of jealousy, the scene suddenly shifts back to the manor where a frantic maid desperately calls out for Lady Sarah. Inside the bustling estate, an overly helpful Sarah insists on assisting the flustered maid with the heavy laundry, arguing that working together will finish the chores faster despite the maid pleading with her to sit down and rest. Displaying her boundless empathy, Sarah softly explains that helping out means Emma will finally have more precious time to rest, leaving the poor maid completely speechless and touched. Deeply moved by the noblewoman's sheer selflessness, Emma the maid beams with admiration and loudly praises Lady Sarah for being such an incredibly kind and wonderful person. Questioning how her recent outing with Lord Albert was, Emma looks eagerly at Sarah. Sarah's friend notes that the town must have been quite lively. Warmly agreeing that she had a wonderful time, Sarah smiles as Emma enthusiastically suggests they go shopping together next time. Emma excitedly describes a delightful roasted chestnut shop, absolutely certain that Sarah would love it too. Admitting that the outing was truly enjoyable, Sarah hesitantly confesses that she has never had such experiences before. Gripping her chest with deep insecurity, Sarah anxiously wonders if it is truly okay for her to keep enjoying such happy moments and if she can stay there forever. Standing nervously in her maid uniform, Sarah recalls the hostility she received from Lady Layla and questions the reason behind it. A maid suddenly approaches the two girls, holding out an envelope and announcing that there is a letter for Sarah. Staring at the sealed envelope with wide-eyed shock, Sarah and Emma wonder aloud who could have possibly sent it. Standing in his library, Lord Albert looks completely baffled as he reads an unexpected invitation to a tea party from Lady Layla. Holding the invitation hesitantly, Sarah approaches Albert and admits that she cannot decide what to do on her own. Albert's expression darkens into a serious, concerned scowl as he quietly murmurs Lady Layla's name. He mentally notes that the unkind way Layla behaved previously makes this sudden invitation for Sarah highly suspicious. Remembering his own past experiences, Albert worries deeply that this situation could easily escalate into conflict. Frustrated by his own busy schedule preventing him from accompanying her, Albert realizes that sending Sarah into such a situation alone might be dangerous. Leaning in closely to gauge her true feelings, Albert gently asks Sarah what she genuinely wants to do. He reassures her that she does not have to go if she does not wish to, offering to politely decline the invitation on her behalf. Gazing downward thoughtfully, Sarah mentions hearing that nobles highly value their social connections. She earnestly explains her desperate desire to be of even the slightest help to him, stating she would hate for her refusal to cause Lord Albert any trouble. Stepping forward with newfound resolve, Sarah firmly announces to a surprised Albert that she will go to the party. Albert leans down with clear concern while Emma asks if Sarah is truly going because she wants to or if she is just forcing herself. Sarah earnestly explains that while every day since arriving has been incredibly enjoyable, just staying and doing nothing feels even worse to her. Clutching her hands together tightly, she expresses a deep, unwavering desire to be of help to the household, even if it is just in a small way. Despite her insecurities about managing it well, Sarah optimistically hopes to talk to Layla and perhaps even become friends with her. Smiling proudly at her bravery, Albert entrusts Emma with sending Sarah's reply, while Sarah looks on in slight surprise. Albert declares that Emma will accompany Sarah to the tea party and instructs them to inform him if anything happens so he can handle it later. Deeply moved by his protective support, Sarah bows her head and expresses her profound gratitude. As she turns to take her leave, Albert unexpectedly reaches out and catches her hand, stopping her in her tracks. Sarah turns back toward him with a confused expression, silently wondering what is the matter. Albert gazes down at her intensely, his soft and captivating eyes filled with unspoken emotion. Startling her completely, Albert leans in close and presses a tender, unexpected kiss to Sarah's cheek. Flustered and wide-eyed, Sarah touches her cheek and stammers out a flustered question about what just happened. Smiling warmly, Albert explains that he cast a special charm just for her to ensure that everything goes well. Still blushing heavily, Sarah listens as he nervously apologizes for suddenly acting so boldly without warning. Holding her hands gently, Albert urges her not to push herself too hard and promises to step in if the situation ever gets to be too much. He holds her small hands firmly within his own, silently conveying his absolute protective devotion. Looking up into his reassuring eyes, Sarah softly thanks Lord Albert for his incredible kindness. The massive, imposing gates of Layla's luxurious aristocratic estate loom silently against the bright sky. Inside the lavish parlor, Sarah politely thanks Lady Layla for the invitation, but Layla dramatically dismisses such pleasant formalities. With a dangerously sharp smile, Layla gracefully invites Sarah to come forward and have a seat. Sarah and Emma stand awkwardly in front of a completely full table surrounded by snickering nobles, prompting a confused reaction from Sarah. Looking around in nervous bewilderment, Sarah softly asks where she is supposed to sit. Feigning an innocent expression, Layla smirks cruelly and gasps that she completely forgot. The other noblewomen burst into cruel laughter as Layla sarcastically apologizes for failing to prepare a seat and suggests Sarah just stand or perhaps sit on the floor. Furious at the blatant disrespect, Emma furiously steps forward to call out Lady Layla's highly inappropriate attitude. Layla smirks mockingly and asks what Emma means, fully aware that this is Sarah's very first tea party. Emma passionately argues that treating Sarah with such deliberate hostility will only serve to startle her. Standing her ground defiantly, Emma firmly reminds the room that Lady Sarah is extremely important to Lord Albert. Enraged by the maid's defiance, Layla aggressively demands silence and asks how a mere servant dares to speak so arrogantly in her presence. Intimidated by the sudden outburst, Sarah flinches and stammers weakly in an attempt to defuse the rising tension. Emma boldly apologizes for overstepping, but firmly declares she is present today as Lord Albert's representative to accompany Lady Sarah. A hand gracefully extends a sealed envelope with a prominent wax stamp, as a voice notes its arrival. The recipient realizes with a start that the mysterious letter is actually a direct correspondence from Lord Albert himself. Lady Layla glares downward in menacing silence, her eyes narrowing as she processes the unexpected delivery. Standing tall in her elegant dark gown, Layla intensely scans the contents of the parchment with a deeply serious expression. Enraged by what she reads, Layla furiously crushes the letter in her trembling hands while gritting her teeth in sheer frustration. A quiet, bewildered gasp breaks the tense silence as someone reacts in sheer confusion to the sudden display of anger. Suddenly shifting her attention, Layla glares down at a seated Sarah and demands to ask her a direct question. Layla mockingly asks how Sarah managed to win Lord Albert over, sneering that being his favorite must feel incredibly rewarding, which completely startles the young girl. Leaning in with an intimidating glare, Layla reveals she had someone investigate Sarah's background, noting the country's tolerance toward witches. Layla sneers that having a foreboding cursed witch from the battlefield in a duke's household would undeniably bring terrible disgrace to Lord Albert if the public ever found out. A haunting vision of a weeping noblewoman clasping her hands in desperate prayer flashes through the tense atmosphere. Layla continues her cruel verbal assault, insisting that Sarah's ominous reputation will inevitably stir up catastrophic trouble for the open-minded duke's family. Sarah's eyes widen in sheer horror, her irises trembling as the sheer weight of Layla's malicious accusations finally sinks in. Biting her lip in bitter resentment, Layla angrily wonders why a lowly girl like Sarah is considered far more valuable than herself. The memory of Lord Albert's fiercely protective letter flashes vividly in Layla's mind, fueling her deep-seated jealousy and rage. She realizes with mounting dread that the letter was a severe warning, explicitly threatening unforgivable consequences if she dared to harm the child. Trembling with indignant fury, Layla vows she will absolutely never allow this creepy, mysterious child to hold a superior position over her. Desperate to protect her mistress, Emma courageously steps between them and begs Layla to stop, passionately defending Sarah's noble service on the battlefield. Emma continues her desperate plea, insisting that the incredibly kind Sarah harbors zero ill intentions and does not deserve such vicious hostility. Layla's eye twitches violently with unbridled rage, absolutely furious that a mere servant is daring to talk back to her. Glaring daggers at the defiant maid, Layla dangerously asks if Emma has already forgotten the strict commands she just issued. Raising her hand high to strike a vicious blow, Layla screams in fury at the servant's audacity to answer back. Moving with lightning speed, Sarah throws her own body in front of Emma just as Layla swings her hand downward with a furious scream. A sharp gasp of sheer disbelief echoes through the parlor as the terrifying scene unfolds. A horrified Emma screams her lady's name in pure panic as Sarah bravely takes the agonizing hit to protect her. Despite her brightly reddened cheek, a relieved Sarah smiles softly and assures a panicking Emma that she is perfectly all right. Gently pushing Emma safely behind her, Sarah stands tall and confronts Lady Layla with remarkable, unwavering composure. Clutching her chest with profound sincerity, Sarah calmly admits her past on the battlefield and acknowledges that she was never a welcomed presence in their country. Staring directly into Layla's eyes with an unbreakable gaze, Sarah firmly accepts the harsh injustices that have constantly surrounded her existence. Sarah solemnly reflects on the constant sorrow she endured back home, but beautifully counters that she also experienced fleeting moments of genuine happiness. Standing with quiet dignity, Sarah gently explains that despite the relentless cruelty she faced, she was always taught to hold onto a small glimmer of hope. She passionately declares her unwavering determination to do her absolute best, refusing to let the darkness completely consume her resilient spirit. Unfazed by Layla's dismissive scoff, Sarah clutches her brooch and courageously continues her heartfelt speech. With profound gratitude illuminating her face, Sarah reveals that coming here finally showed her a beautiful world where people are actually kind to her. Snarling like a cornered beast, an absolutely furious Layla screams that Sarah's pitiful sob story does not make her worthy of Lord Albert. Sarah attempts to gently correct the furious noblewoman, but Layla aggressively cuts her off with a piercing shout of ridicule. Layla begins to unleash another venomous insult, but is suddenly interrupted when someone fearfully calls out her name. A stern, authoritative voice slices through the heavy tension of the parlor, firmly ordering the enraged Lady Layla to stop immediately. The surrounding noblewomen anxiously whisper among themselves, terrified that physically striking someone so deeply important to the powerful Duke will bring disastrous consequences. Layla's eyes widen in sheer panic as she realizes her violent outburst has completely backfired and alienated her from her own peers. Desperately trying to share the blame, Layla furiously points out that the other women were cruelly laughing alongside her just moments ago. Shrinking back in cowardice, the gossiping nobles quickly make excuses, claiming they only attended the gathering because a lucrative reward was promised. They coldly abandon their hostess, brutally murmuring that their presence at the tea party was never actually out of loyalty to Layla herself. Standing entirely alone in the grand room, a completely humiliated Layla turns her face away in crushing, bitter regret. Her sanity cracking under the pressure, Layla forces out a broken, hysterical laugh and wildly demands to know why Sarah isn't mocking her failure. Leaning in with a deeply unsettling, hollow smirk, Layla cynically declares that this entire situation is nothing but a pathetic farce designed to destroy Sarah. Completely defeated, Layla bitterly acknowledges the sheer, laughable absurdity of a mere count's daughter trying to ruin someone heavily protected by the powerful Duke. Looking downward with venomous envy, Layla spits out how agonizingly frustrating it is to watch everything perfectly fall into place for Sarah while she relies on the Duke's endless support. Instead of gloating or acting superior, an incredibly gentle and concerned Sarah takes a hesitant step forward and softly calls out her tormentor's name. Caught completely off guard by the unexpected display of genuine compassion, Layla clutches her throat and looks back with wide-eyed shock. A blonde girl leans in and gently kisses a wide-eyed, dark-haired girl on the cheek. Shock ripples through the dark-haired girl as the unexpected affection catches her completely off guard. The dark-haired girl's eye widens in absolute, frozen disbelief at the sudden kiss. Time seems to stand still as the sheer shock of the moment fully registers on her face. Flushing a deep crimson, the girl named Sarah covers her mouth in flustered panic as a small gasp escapes her lips. Confusion and intense embarrassment wash over her as she completely loses her composure. Nearby onlookers gasp in stunned silence, their jaws dropping at the brazen display of affection. The audience is left entirely speechless by the completely unexpected and scandalous interaction. Flustered and apologetic, the blonde girl explains that the kiss was actually a spell, offering a sheepish apology for her actions. Still reeling, Sarah stammers out a bewildered reaction, her hand permanently glued to her burning cheek. Sarah's mind short-circuits as she desperately tries to process the revelation that the intimate gesture was merely a magical spell. Panic takes over completely as her flustered brain struggles to comprehend the sheer absurdity of the situation. Recovering slightly, Sarah realizes the spell was cast in the earnest hope that things would finally go well for Lady Layla. A quiet confirmation settles the matter, though the lingering shock still heavily colors the atmosphere. Lady Layla steps forward with gentle determination, earnestly expressing her desire to learn a great deal from now on. She acknowledges that the process might be unpleasant, but her resolve remains steadfast. With a tender, hopeful expression, Lady Layla tentatively asks if they could forge a new bond. She warmly confesses that she would be incredibly happy if Sarah would agree to become her friend. Lady Layla's gaze remains soft yet piercingly sincere as she waits for an answer. Her delicate profile radiates a quiet, vulnerable hope in the stillness of the room. Offering a polite excuse and a graceful bow, Lady Layla announces that she will be heading home for the day. Leaving on a warm note, she expresses her genuine hope that they can meet again very soon. Standing alone by the grand window, Sarah stares out as Layla's heartfelt request to be friends echoes loudly in her mind. The surprising warmth of the invitation leaves her lost in a deep, conflicted reverie. Watching Layla depart, Sarah marvels at the girl's desire for friendship despite everything that has happened. Heavy guilt washes over her as she remembers the truly terrible things she had previously said to Layla. Sarah's eye narrows in a complex mix of remorse, confusion, and budding intrigue. The stark contrast between her past hostility and Layla's unyielding kindness pierces her heart. Breaking the silence of her internal monologue, Sarah can only describe Lady Layla as a profoundly strange child. The sheer unpredictability of Layla's forgiving nature leaves her utterly bewildered. Night falls over the sprawling, opulent estate, casting long shadows across the magnificent architecture. The moonlight bathes the grand mansion in an eerie yet beautiful, tranquil glow. Approaching the heavy doors, Lord Albert softly asks if it is all right for him to come inside and see Sarah. After receiving a quiet confirmation, he prepares to step into her private chambers. Stepping into the room, Lord Albert immediately offers a sincere apology for his delayed arrival. His tone carries a heavy weight of concern as he finally checks in on her. Albert looks down at her with gentle worry, noting that she must be incredibly tired after the day's dramatic events. Brushing off his concern, Sarah quickly reassures him that she is completely fine. Suddenly, Lord Albert's sharp gaze locks onto something concerning, his eye widening slightly in immediate alarm. A tense silence fills the space as he silently assesses the situation. Breaking the tension, Lord Albert points out with knowing worry that Sarah's cheeks are flushed a deep, concerning red. He immediately suspects that the physical toll of the day's altercation is finally showing. Albert expresses his profound regret, apologizing deeply after hearing the disturbing news that Sarah was struck. Sarah hurriedly attempts to defuse his anger, insisting that she is fine and that the injury no longer hurts. Lord Albert exasperatedly questions why she won't treat the injury herself, noting the wound is nearly 3 times the size of an eye. Caught off guard by his intense scrutiny, Sarah lets out a bewildered gasp of surprise. With a fond but exasperated sigh, Lord Albert notes that her stubborn neglect of her own well-being is exactly like her. Blinking in realization, Sarah sheepishly admits that she had completely forgotten about the injury until he pointed it out. Albert's expression darkens as he vows to be harsh and personally handle the matter with the Rowan family for daring to hurt her. Panicking at the thought of escalating the conflict, Sarah desperately begs him to drop it, insisting she is fine. Sarah admits that while things went poorly today, she strongly feels they will definitely be able to get along from now on. She attributes this sudden, hopeful turn of events entirely to the effectiveness of Lord Albert's charm. Utterly confused by her statement, Lord Albert asks what she means by his charm and if he did something specific that morning. He stares at her in blank bewilderment, completely unaware of any magical intervention on his part. Nodding earnestly, Sarah confirms that his actions earlier that day were exactly what turned the tide. She firmly believes his subtle influence is the sole reason for the positive outcome. Sarah explains with a soft, reassuring smile that because he wished for things to go well, everything is finally okay now. She completely credits his earnest desire for peace as the catalyst for Layla's sudden friendship. Realizing the misunderstanding, Lord Albert quietly wonders if he actually received the charm directly from Sarah. When she confirms it with a bright smile, he is left briefly speechless by her unwavering faith. Leaning in closer, Lord Albert smoothly asks if she would be willing to perform the same magical charm for him as well. Taken entirely by surprise by the bold request, Sarah lets out a startled squeak of confusion. Framing his request with vulnerability, Albert admits that recently many things haven't been going well for him. He earnestly tells her that he would be incredibly happy if she could cast a protective charm over him too. He looks down at her with a heavy, expectant gaze, gently asking what she thinks of his heartfelt proposal. The intimate tension in the room skyrockets as he patiently waits for her flustered response. Sarah is struck entirely speechless, her eyes wide and shining as her brain completely stalls under his intense, handsome stare. A thick, heavy silence falls between them as the weight of his request fully sinks in. Stammering through her immense embarrassment, Sarah awkwardly agrees to his request. Mustering her courage, she timidly asks the tall nobleman if he could please bend down just a little bit. Readily complying with her soft command, Lord Albert smoothly lowers his head until they are perfectly eye to eye. The agonizingly close proximity causes Sarah's heart to hammer wildly against her ribs. Whispering a breathless apology, Sarah tentatively leans forward to deliver the charming kiss. Her heart pounds deafeningly in her chest as she closes the final, agonizing distance between them. Hovering mere millimeters from his skin, Sarah suddenly freezes in absolute panic, unable to complete the intimate gesture. Her courage completely evaporates at the very last possible second, leaving her paralyzed with embarrassment. Ripping herself away with a defeated sigh, Sarah miserably admits that she simply cannot go through with the kiss. Lord Albert watches her retreat, a flicker of quiet disappointment crossing his features as he acknowledges her refusal. Drowning in guilt, Sarah frantically apologizes for making such a strange and uncomfortable request in the first place. She misinterprets the situation entirely, believing she made him feel bad with her unbearable awkwardness. Fumbling for an excuse, Sarah desperately tries to explain that there is a massive difference between kissing Lady Layla and kissing him. She trails off in a flustered mess, completely unsure of how to properly articulate the overwhelming romantic tension. Blushing furiously, Sarah vulnerably confesses that being this close to him makes her heart race uncontrollably. She admits she doesn't fully understand her own overwhelming emotions, but the intensity is far too much to handle. Taking a massive, desperate breath, Sarah vows that she will eventually do her absolute best to be able to kiss him. Her completely earnest, almost battle-ready declaration of future affection catches him wonderfully off guard. Breaking into a brilliant, genuine laugh, Lord Albert playfully accepts her challenge. With a bright, teasing smile, he declares that he will be eagerly waiting and looking forward to that promised day. The two stand together in the quiet luxury of the room, surrounded by a warm, newly forged romantic tension. A comfortable, affectionate silence finally settles over the grand estate as their bond deepens. Meanwhile, in a shadowed, dimly lit room, a mysterious informant addresses the imposing Lord Werner. The informant casually notes that Lord Albert's estate has been unusually lively and active recently. The informant reveals a dangerous secret leaked from an insider, claiming that Albert is secretly sheltering the infamous Witch of Relivra. This explosive piece of espionage immediately shifts the political landscape of the noble houses. With a cold, calculating smile, Lord Werner acknowledges the report and immediately orders his subordinate, Rainer, to investigate the target. A dark new threat looms on the horizon as Werner sets his sinister, probing plans into motion. The narrative shifts sharply, emphasizing the dramatic, inescapable title of the young noble lady caught in the crossfire. The gears of fate turn as the story prepares for its next volatile chapter. Time leaps forward seamlessly, establishing a tense new status quo exactly 1 month after the fateful, chaotic tea party. The grand mansion stands silently against the sky, hiding the brewing storm within its opulent walls. The chapter opens with a stylized title sequence establishing the quiet setting of the manor. Sitting peacefully at her desk, Sarah begins composing a heartfelt letter to Lady Layla. Watching Emma diligently write a thank you note heavily inspires Sarah to put her own feelings onto paper. Having recently learned the country's alphabet, Sarah earnestly wants to practice expressing her own thoughts. Despite her clumsy handwriting, Sarah carefully finishes her letter and bravely prepares to send it to Lady Layla. Sarah is overwhelmed with sudden joy when Layla actually sends back a proper, formal reply. The simple act of corresponding through letters quickly becomes an incredibly enjoyable routine for her. Standing proudly in the grand library, Sarah finishes another draft and decides to ask Emma for assistance. Turning gracefully in her chair, Sarah realizes she needs her maid's help and calls out softly. Another maid hurriedly approaches, bowing deeply to explain that Emma was unexpectedly called away to cover a staff shortage. Sarah's eye widens slightly as a sudden, unexpected sound draws her sharp attention. A mysterious male voice cuts through the hallway as a noble stranger approaches the two women. Startled by the sudden intrusion, Sarah and the maid quickly turn to face the elegant, unfamiliar nobleman. The handsome, fair-haired stranger offers a smooth, calculating smile as he easily captures their attention. The flustered maid stammers out a frantic apology, admitting she left Sarah alone with a complete stranger. Quickly recovering her composure, the maid steps forward to properly introduce the unexpected guest. She gestures respectfully toward the blond man, formally introducing him as Lord Rainer. The maid brightly explains that Rainer is a nobleman tied to the service family who frequently brings delicious sweets. Stepping fully into the light, Lord Rainer offers a flawless, aristocratic bow to the young lady. Rainer introduces himself with a charming hum, his eyes gleaming as he remarks on finally meeting the famous Lady Sarah. His gaze narrows with intense, hidden meaning as he smoothly asks her to take care of him from now on. Caught completely off guard by his intense aura, Sarah can only offer a timid, stammered agreement. The other maid suddenly yells down the hall for Emma, creating a loud, chaotic distraction. Thanking Rainer for the sweets, the busy maid quickly excuses herself and rushes down the corridor. Sarah stands frozen in rising panic as her only buffer hastily vanishes down the hallway. Left entirely alone with the imposing stranger, Sarah's mind races frantically for something polite to say. She nervously fidgets with her hands, completely drawing a blank on appropriate aristocratic small talk. Desperately trying to break the heavy silence, Sarah steels her nerves and prepares to initiate a conversation. Before she can utter a single word, Rainer abruptly cuts through the tension with a sudden question. Rainer casually notes that he heard she is the daughter of the infamous Relivra family, instantly freezing her in place. Gripping the delicate fabric of her dress, Sarah nervously confirms her dark lineage. A dark, knowing smirk ghosts across Rainer's lips as he leans in to press the sensitive topic. He mockingly sympathizes, suggesting it must have been incredibly difficult for a noblewoman like her in such a brutal place. The sheer audacity of his probing question hits Sarah like a physical blow, leaving her utterly bewildered. Rainer's voice drops to a conspiratorial whisper as he shockingly claims that they are exactly the same. His piercing gaze locks onto hers, heavily implying a shared, tragic understanding of their foreign origins. He provocatively asks if her comfortable new life in the mansion has made her completely forget where she came from. Rainer challenges her perceived safety, smoothly pointing out how incredibly strange her current situation truly is. He sharply contrasts their brutal homeland, where noblewomen are persecuted, with this strangely welcoming new country. Despite being fundamentally the same human beings, he notes the terrifying disparity in how they are treated. Leaning aggressively into her personal space, Rainer viciously warns that these new allies could easily turn their backs on her. He explicitly reminds her that she is still a witch, urging her to never let her guard down among these people. Rainer's cruel words force her to recall the horrific, traumatic abuse she suffered in her homeland. Trembling violently, Sarah mentally confesses that the nightmares of her past still haunt her every single night. A horrifying flashback of a burning which violently sears itself across Sarah's overwhelmed mind. Tears well up in Sarah's terrified eyes as the agonizing fear that she will be burned alive even here threatens to crush her. Her face falls into deep, suffocating shadow as the paralyzing dread of her true identity completely takes over. Just as the panic threatens to consume her, Lord Albert's warm, familiar voice suddenly calls her name from the doorway. Unaware of the sinister conversation, Albert steps into the hall with a bright, welcoming smile. Still trembling and on the verge of tears, Sarah stares up at Albert as her two drastically different worlds violently collide. Startled by the sudden intrusion, someone gasps as a familiar, calculating voice greets Lord Albert after a long absence. Shocked by the unfolding scene, Lord Albert demands to know what Rainer is doing and furiously commands him to stay away from Sarah. A close-up reveals Rainer's piercing, mischievous gaze as he smoothly mentions hearing rumors that a new person has come to this mansion. Staring back with intense, defensive eyes, Albert listens as Rainer casually claims he only came to greet the noblewoman from the Relivra family. Turning his back to depart, Raynor dismisses the tension, playfully mocking Lord Albert for being a perpetual worrywart while promising to head back now. Standing in the grand hallway alongside a confused Sarah, Lord Albert watches the retreating figure in tense, brooding silence. Before fully departing, Raynor pauses to subtly and menacingly remind Albert that his older brother is also worried about him. With a sharp, lingering glare cast over his shoulder, Raynor officially excuses himself from the heavy, suffocating confrontation. The elegant, long-coated figure of Raynor confidently strides out the large double doors, leaving a thick blanket of anxiety in his wake. Left alone in the corridor, a bewildered Sarah watches as a deeply shadowed, visibly stressed Lord Albert stands frozen in place. Sarah stares up at him with wide, concerned eyes, completely speechless in the wake of the sudden, hostile encounter. Snapping out of his dark reverie, Albert briefly stammers as he realizes his intense reaction has deeply alarmed his companion. Quickly apologizing to Sarah, he earnestly checks to see if she is okay, prompting a flustered, startled reaction from her. Noting his intensely serious expression, a worried Sarah turns the question back on Lord Albert to ask if he is also okay. Gazing down at her with a heavy, burdened heart, he softly breathes out her name in a tone laced with unspoken dread. Leaning in with an urgent, protective intensity, Albert implores a bewildered Sarah to stay as far away from Raynor as possible. His voice trembles with fear as he openly admits he has absolutely no idea what malicious things Raynor might do to her. Fragmented, terrified thoughts plague his mind as he desperately wishes to avoid getting her involved with that dangerous man as much as possible. Trying to delicately piece the puzzle together, Sarah hesitantly asks if something specific happened between Lord Albert and Lord Raynor to cause such violent friction. Observing his pained, averted gaze, she gently points out that the two noblemen clearly did not seem to be on the best of terms. A dark shadow falls over Albert's memories as he chillingly confesses that Raynor and his family have always made him suffer. Transported back to a grim, heartbreaking childhood, Albert recounts that the relentless torment was especially bad when he was young. Gripping his trembling hands in sheer despair, a young, silhouetted Albert weeps as he recalls how his abusers always cornered him. Lost in the terrifying, looming trees of his past, he introduces a sudden, desperate glimmer of hope into the dark narrative. He reveals that during his most excruciatingly painful time, someone miraculously arrived to help him escape the nightmare. A vivid memory materializes deep within a rain-soaked forest, showing a young, broken Albert looking up at a mysterious cloaked figure. Through the torrential downpour, the enigmatic savior is revealed to be a young girl with long flowing hair and a hauntingly solemn expression. Her large, luminous eyes stare forward with a striking intensity, burning an unforgettable image of salvation into the young boy's traumatized mind. Flashing back to the present, Sarah's matching, compassionate eyes perfectly echo the exact same profound gaze from his childhood memories. Overwhelmed by the world-shattering revelation, Lord Albert gently reaches out to cradle Sarah's face right there in the echoing grand hallway. With breathless awe and absolute certainty, he softly declares that the heroic girl who saved him in the forest was actually Sarah all along. He passionately insists that he remembers the fateful day he met her so vividly, recalling an aggressive, life-altering confrontation. A brutal flashback shows a battered, exhausted young Sarah as harsh voices violently demand the Witch of Relivera to show herself. The harrowing memory shifts to a bright military-style courtyard where an imposing officer stands before a downtrodden, handcuffed Sarah. The strict military personnel respectfully address an unseen excellency, asking him to wait the moment while they complete some necessary legal formalities. Anchored in the present once more, Albert gazes at her with deep affection, murmuring her name as he searches her face for a spark of recognition. Clutching his chest with a look of desperate, vulnerable hope, he initiates a painful, emotionally loaded question. With his wounded heart laid completely bare, he begs to know if she remembers that crucial, life-changing encounter from their past. Sarah tilts her head in genuine confusion, her blank, innocent expression silently indicating that the distant memory is entirely lost to her. Staring into her beautifully vacant eyes, Albert reads the heartbreaking truth before she even speaks, silently acknowledging that she doesn't know. The flashback abruptly resumes as a saluting guard escorts Sarah away, politely asking His Excellency to wait in the lounge because it won't take long. From behind, a younger Albert watches helplessly as the stern military officer leads the young, frail girl through an imposing stone doorway. Back in the present, Albert drops his hands in quiet, melancholic resignation, bitterly accepting that of course she doesn't remember him. Closing his eyes to hide his devastating pain, he rationalizes that even if she did remember the past, she wouldn't recognize him as he is now. The narrative dramatically plunges 8 years into the past, landing outside a massive, highly ornate mansion where a servant softly excuses herself. Inside a heavily draped, gloomy bedroom, a maid uncovers a silver tray to serve a bedridden boy his meal, prompting his weak, dismissive inquiry. The sick boy stubbornly refuses the food, miserably explaining that he has no appetite and will only throw it back up anyway. Sighing in frustration, the stern maid scolds him to eat so he gets proper nutrition, selfishly warning that the staff will be the ones getting scolded later if his illness never improves. Lying limply against his pillows, a frail, deeply depressed young Lord Albert weakly endures the servant's harsh, demanding reprimand. The narrator reveals that young Albert was born with an incurable disease and wasn't expected to see adulthood, forcing his desperate parents to seek help from doctors, sorcerers, and witches as his condition only worsened. Gossip echoes through the halls as maids whisper about the service family facing trouble due to another recently failed pharmaceutical project. Lying weak and awake in bed, a despondent Albert overhears the servants wondering if they will even be able to keep their jobs. The gossiping voices continue to drift into his room, lamenting another failed business venture and predicting the family's ruin at this rate. The cruel whispers escalate as they call him a useless burden who keeps lingering even though his parents have given up and stopped visiting. Staring blankly ahead, Albert remains motionless as one of the maids suddenly panics and warns that he might hear them. The maids awkwardly apologize through the double doors before fleeing, leaving Albert to silently reflect on always being called a burden in his own house. Gripping his shirt in frustration, he admits he understands the family's difficult financial situation but hates feeling completely useless and unable to do anything. Despite the familiar sting of those harsh words, Albert rolls over in bed and notes that today the insults do not feel as painful as usual. A quiet, heavy transition emphasizes the lingering weight of his depressing circumstances and isolation. Gazing fondly at a decorative notebook, a faint smile touches his lips as he stubbornly reassures himself that he will recover someday. Seeking solace in his dreams of a better future, he begins diligently writing down all the goals he wants to accomplish in his notebook. His ambitious hopes fill the pages, detailing his profound desires to restore his family's honor, make friends, and eventually get married to make a wife happy. Overwhelmed by his own excitement, he energetically declares that there is so much to do and that he absolutely has to get better soon. A sudden voice calls out his name, snapping him out of his hopeful, future-focused reverie. A servant announces the impending arrival of his elder brother, Lord Werner, who will be visiting him today. The narrator somberly notes that dreaming about this distant, healthy future was the only time Albert ever truly felt happy. The gossiping maids shift their tone entirely, cheerfully praising Lord Werner as a wonderfully caring older brother. The grand doors swing open as a maid enthusiastically declares that Lord Werner always looks forward to seeing him. Stepping confidently into the room, Werner casually and cheerfully greets his younger brother. Wearing a bright, seemingly warm smile, Werner steps forward and affectionately notes that his dear little brother is looking well. Werner smoothly thanks the flustered maid for taking care of Albert and ensuring he eats the snacks provided. The delighted maid waves off the thanks, exclaiming that everyone's spirits are lifted whenever Lord Werner visits the estate. Maintaining his polite facade, Werner smoothly asks the servant to give them some privacy so they can speak alone. As soon as the noisy maid leaves, Werner's smile vanishes into a dark scowl as he coldly complains about her lack of refinement and threatens to fire her. Dropping the caring brother act completely, Werner viciously lashes out, calling Albert a curse who forces him to clean up every mess instead of inheriting the estate. The narrator reveals that Werner yearned for freedom and never wanted to be tied down, but the family burden fell entirely on him due to Albert's illness. A young Albert listens silently to the tirade, fully aware of their dire financial situation. Absorbing the bitter insults about lying in bed all day, Albert repeatedly apologizes, accepting his role as the punching bag for his brother's immense frustration. Gripping his collar in silent anguish, Albert endures the verbal abuse because taking it was the only thing he could actually do for his family. A tight close-up of his pained, closed eyes highlights his quiet, breathless suffering as he absorbs the toxic words. He desperately hopes that if he ever gets better and helps shoulder the family's massive burden, his brother might finally stop resenting him. An exterior shot of the grand estate illustrates the passage of time as the narrator tragically notes that such a day of recovery never came. Reaching his 13th birthday, Albert lies sweating and gasping for breath as his condition severely and rapidly deteriorates. Panting heavily in bed, a sickly Albert opens his eyes in confusion upon hearing a sudden, unexpected knock at his door. From behind the door, Werner abruptly announces he is coming in, prompting a weak, hesitant confirmation from Albert. Shocked and anxious because he didn't hear about any planned visit today, Albert nervously wonders why his brother is suddenly here. Stepping into the room, Werner coldly states that he would like to introduce someone to him. A young, sharply dressed boy with a mysterious smile is presented, and Werner formally introduces him as Rainer. Noticing Albert's deep confusion, Werner smoothly steps beside the new boy and formally introduces him to his bedridden brother. Staring with wide, terrified eyes, Albert listens as Werner drops a life-shattering revelation, bluntly declaring that Rainer is his replacement. Werner callously explains that since Albert brings no benefit and is just dead weight, their father decided to adopt Rainer to take over his role. With ruthless efficiency, Werner praises Rainer's capabilities and confirms that this new adopted son will serve the family from now on. Placing a hand on Rainer's shoulder, Werner cruelly tells Albert he is no longer needed, sighing in relief that a huge weight has finally been lifted. Turning his back on his discarded little brother, Werner bids him a final, totally dismissive farewell. The heavy doors shut with a resounding thud, leaving a devastated Albert completely alone with harsh instructions to just take care of himself. Tears streaming down his face, Albert chokes back a sob and weakly tries to convince himself that it is all a cruel lie. Burying his face into his pillows, he completely breaks down, his small frame shaking with overwhelming grief and total abandonment. Desperately repeating that it's fine, he tries to aggressively pound his sadness and panic away into his mattress. Fueled by a sudden, desperate rage, he vows to prove them all wrong and stubbornly insists he will eventually get better. Grabbing his notebook of dreams, a tearful, manic laugh escapes his lips as he wildly clings to his fragile, fading hope. A close-up of a wide, trembling eye captures a moment of sudden, sharp realization or deep-seated terror. Reaching toward the light from a bed, the frail protagonist despairs that his goal is truly impossible. Clinging to his thin, weak arms, he laments his inability to prove his detractors wrong or overcome his physical limitations. Tears well in his eyes as he admits to himself that he has known the harsh truth all along. Seized by a fit of coughing and misery, he collapses onto his pillow while clutching a crumpled notebook to his face. The heavy silence of the ornate room is shattered when a cold, mocking voice demands to know what he is doing. Startled and sweating, the boy frantically hides his notebook and stammers that he wasn't doing anything at all. His antagonist looms over him, snatching away the private journal filled with desperate scribbles and future dreams. The intruder sneers as he reads the title, "Things I Want to Do," while the boy begs for the notebook to be returned. With cruel amusement, the intruder reads aloud the boy's humble wishes to find love, make friends, and restore his family's honor. The sick boy falls from his bed in a desperate attempt to stop the mockery, let out a pained grunt as he hits the floor. Looking down at the crumpled figure with utter contempt, the standing youth calls the display pathetic. The bully points out the irony of the boy being the elder brother despite his complete lack of strength. He mocks the dying boy for holding on to hope while his body slowly wastes away from an incurable illness. With a cold finality, he declares that all of the boy's aspirations and efforts are entirely pointless. A tense silence fills the room as the power dynamic between the two brothers becomes lethally clear. While tearing the notebook to pieces, the healthy brother boasts that he has already secured the position meant for the heir. He looms over his fallen sibling with a dark shadow over his eyes, telling him to simply give up and die in peace. The protagonist clutches at the torn remnants of his dreams on the floor, gasping in emotional and physical agony. He reflects on the merciless nature of his household just as a decisive, violent shift in the atmosphere occurs. Sensing a sudden, dangerous presence, the boy jolts upright in bed with wide, terrified eyes. He stares in shock at his brother, whose expression has twisted into something far more sinister and unrecognizable. Confused and trembling, the boy notes that his brother seems terrifyingly different than usual as a hand reaches for him. Without warning, the brother's hand clamps firmly around the sick boy's throat, cutting off his breath. The assailant snarls that the boy is unbearably annoying, his eyes filled with a new, murderous intent. He expresses deep hatred for seeing a face identical to his own lying there in such a pitiful, weakened state. The brother demands to know how much longer the boy plans on staying alive, his voice dripping with venom. As he tightens his grip, he darkly suggests that he should just finish the job and kill his sibling himself. Struggling against the crushing pressure, the protagonist panics as he finds himself unable to breathe or escape. In a frantic survival reflex, the boy reaches for a heavy vase sitting on the bedside table. With a burst of desperate strength, he shatters the vase against his brother's head, screaming internally that he doesn't want to die. The brother reels back, gasping in shock as the boy sits up, panting and terrified by his own violent act. A heavy, breathless pause follows the impact as the room falls into a stunned, ringing silence. The boy stammers out to his brother, watching as blood begins to drip from the assailant's head. The brother covers his face with a trembling hand, letting out a low, eerie sound that quickly escalates. A chilling, manic laughter begins to erupt from the brother, echoing off the cold walls of the mansion. Like a broken doll, the brother collapses into fits of hysterical laughter while the boy watches in total incomprehension. The suffocating sound of the laughter surrounds the boy, driving him toward a state of pure, primal panic. Unable to endure the madness any longer, the frail boy turns and flees the room as fast as his legs can carry him. Driven by an unknown strength, he bursts out of the mansion and into the dark woods, having nowhere else to go. He realizes with sinking dread that while he has escaped the room, he can never truly go back to his old life. Every breath becomes a sharp pain in his chest as he stumbles through the undergrowth, his vision blurring. His bare feet hit the rough earth as he forces himself onward, though his body is rapidly reaching its limit. Finally collapsing beneath a large tree, the boy sobs into the dirt, overwhelmed by the weight of his family's cruelty. The voices of his kin echo in his mind, reminding him that he is considered nothing more than dead weight. He hears his brother's murderous offer to kill him over and over again, the trauma of the encounter haunting his thoughts. Tears stream down his face as he gasps for air, a broken child abandoned in the wilderness. He cries out for help, questioning why he was born to suffer and if death at his brother's hands would have been better. A sudden rustling in the nearby bushes startles him, and a faint, mysterious voice whispers a plea for help. Terrified and confused, the boy looks toward the shadows and wonders if something else is out there with him. Walking tentatively through the dense forest, the boy wonders if the sound he heard was merely a wild animal or something more significant. Every step is a punishing ordeal for his frail body as he clutches his chest and gasps for a breath that won't come. A sharp glint in his wide eye signals that he has finally spotted something unusual amidst the deep shadows of the trees. In the hazy distance, a mysterious girl with long hair appears like a phantom standing silently between the ancient trunks. Sweat beads on his brow as he continues his desperate, ragged breathing while struggling to maintain his balance. His chronic illness surges with cruel intensity, forcing a pained grunt from his lips as his physical strength evaporates. Darkness begins to crowd his vision as he falls face-first into the dirt before a silent, hooded figure. Trapped in a world of pure physical agony, he whimpers that the pain has become too much to endure. The cloaked girl leans over him with a look of deep concern while he prepares himself for what he believes is the inevitable end. She asks with a trembling voice what is happening to him, noting the obvious signs of his failing health. The world narrows down to the girl's large, expressive eyes as they fill with light and compassion. He manages to notice how stunningly beautiful her eyes are just as the last of his consciousness begins to slip away. Total darkness finally claims him, plunging his mind into a silent and bottomless void. A fragment of a dream or a fleeting memory surfaces, showing him standing healthy and tall alongside the mysterious girl. Cold nightmares of his brother's murderous hands around his neck return to haunt his fading mind. The phantom voice of his sibling echoes through the gloom, mockingly telling him to leave this world in peace. He drifts through a terrifying mental landscape of shadows, searching for an answer or a way back to the light. A strange, rhythmic sound pulses through the darkness, urging him to wake and seek the truth of his situation. A warm and comforting voice begins to resonate in his mind, cutting through the chilling echoes of his past. He gasps as he suddenly returns to reality, finding himself lying safely on the soft forest floor. The girl hovers over him, her voice a soft murmur as she asks if he is finally feeling all right. Panic flares as he jolts upright, his wide eyes scanning the stranger as he frantically questions her identity. A sudden spark of recognition hits him as he stares into the same eyes that haunted his brief, beautiful vision. The girl, still hidden beneath her hood, asks tentatively if his body feels restored and okay. He realizes with a start that the crushing pain and heavy weight of his illness have miraculously vanished. Breathless with shock, he examines his hands and his chest, unable to comprehend the sudden absence of agony. Breathing has never felt this effortless, and he exclaims in wonder that he has never experienced such vitality before. He turns to the mysterious girl, demanding to know if she was the one who performed this impossible miracle on him. She pulls back slightly, her hands trembling as she struggles to find the words to explain her divine actions. Looking down in a gesture of deep humility, the girl offers a soft apology to the bewildered boy. She explains that she sensed something foul within him and took it upon herself to remove the bad thing. The stranger reveals her divine ability to mend broken flesh and banish deep-seated illnesses with a mere touch. She recounts finding a black, mist-like presence coiled inside his body and extracting it to save him. With a gentle reassurance, she tells him that the constant pain he once knew is finally gone forever. She bows her head again, apologizing for interfering with his life without ever asking for his permission. The boy remains frozen in stunned silence, unable to look away from the person who just gave him a second chance. Overwhelmed by her kindness, he declares that her power is truly amazing and calls her a goddess. He stammers his thanks, his heart swelling with a gratitude that feels almost too heavy to carry. He admits that he has never felt this comfortable in his own skin, as if a lifetime of chains has been broken. He describes how the simple act of standing used to be a source of pure agony that he was forced to endure daily. No doctor or healer has ever been able to touch his condition, making her success seem all the more incredible. He is completely mesmerized by the reality of her extraordinary power and the life she has returned to him. The girl asks with a trace of fear if her strange and unnatural gift makes her a monster in his eyes. A wide, joyful smile breaks across his face as he thanks her from the very bottom of his heart. The girl stares back, her eyes reflecting the genuine warmth of his acceptance. He reaffirms her brilliance and asks the question that has been burning in his mind, "Who are you?" The heavy atmosphere of the woods lifts as a new sense of peace and curiosity takes hold of them both. To his surprise, the girl begins to sniffle and wipe away tears, clearly moved by his lack of fear. Concerned by her sudden emotional outburst, the boy leans in and asks what could possibly be wrong. He panics slightly, wondering if he said something offensive, while she struggles to compose herself in the silence. Expressing his profound relief, the young boy softly admits that he is just incredibly happy to see she is finally okay. Gazing upward with a vulnerable expression, he lets the tension bleed out of his trembling frame. Sweating slightly and looking deeply concerned, the boy's large eyes lock onto his companion's shrouded figure. His delicate features reflect a chaotic mixture of lingering fear and profound exhaustion. Addressing her directly, Muya whispers his heartfelt gratitude for the miraculous way she healed his broken body. The soft rustle of the surrounding foliage frames his earnest declaration of thanks. Bathing in the ethereal light filtering through the canopy, Muya bows his head slightly to thank the hooded girl once more. The glowing forest seems to pulse in harmony with the gentle reverence in his voice. Peering out from the deep shadows of her dark cloak, the girl fixes him with a piercing, intense stare as she begins to voice a lingering doubt. Her pale hair frames a face etched with unexpected apprehension. Shifting the conversation's focus, she softly demands to know exactly why he was wandering through this dangerous place to begin with. The question hangs heavy in the humid air of the mystical woodland. Blinking in mild surprise, Muya confesses that he was recklessly chasing after a special bird he used to care about deeply. His voice drops a fraction as the memory of the lost creature washes over him. A melancholic shadow crosses her visible features as Muya somberly admits that he will likely never find his beloved bird again. The harsh reality of his permanent loss seems to resonate in the quiet space between them. Casting his gaze downward in defeat, Muya listens as the mysterious girl simply murmurs a quiet acknowledgement of his sorrow. Her subdued response offers a fragile comfort amidst the overarching gloom. Pressing further, she wonders aloud if his family worries about him venturing into such a treacherous, isolated forest completely on his own. Her interrogation highlights the stark danger of his reckless pursuit. Pausing to gather her thoughts, she gently asks him to describe exactly what this elusive bird looked like. The towering tree behind them stands as a silent witness to their increasingly intimate exchange. A sudden jolt of terror surges through Muya, his pupil dilating into a pinprick of absolute shock as a terrifying realization dawns on him. The blood rapidly drains from his face, leaving him frozen in a state of paralyzing dread. Bowing her head beneath the heavy fabric of her cowl, the girl's pale, delicate profile is illuminated by a fleeting shaft of sunlight. Her expression remains frustratingly unreadable, locked behind a wall of quiet melancholy. Frantically attempting to defuse the sudden tension, Muya stammers and loudly wonders if he has accidentally broached a forbidden topic. His mind races as he desperately searches for a way to rapidly change the subject. Pivoting clumsily, he asks the girl why she has suddenly decided to obscure her face by wearing that heavy hood. The abrupt shift in dialogue breaks the oppressive silence that had momentarily gripped them. Gesturing animatedly, Muya points out that during their initial encounter, she hadn't bothered to hide her features behind a cloak. His innocent curiosity pierces through her carefully constructed defenses. Shyly looking away, she confesses her fear that her eyes might be perceived as ugly, prompting Muya to passionately declare that their unique colors are absolutely stunning. His fierce, unwavering validation catches her completely off guard. Gripping the edge of her hood with trembling fingers, she processes his unexpected compliment while he eagerly insists on seeing her beautiful eyes again. The emotional walls she built begin to crack under the weight of his earnest admiration. Leaning forward with breathless anticipation, Muya asks for permission to gaze upon her face while she flusters, doubting that he truly finds her lack of ugliness genuine. The sheer proximity of his hopeful expression makes her heart flutter erratically. Her slender fingers tighten convulsively around the dark fabric framing her face as she wrestles with her deep-seated insecurities. A quiet war wages in her mind between the instinct to hide and the desperate desire to be seen. Slowly pulling the heavy hood back, her tear-filled, extraordinarily unique eyes are unveiled to the gentle forest light. She holds her breath, bracing herself for the inevitable sting of rejection. In the fragile quiet of the moment, she mentally questions if this boy will truly accept the strange, unsettling nature of her gaze. Her vulnerability is palpable as she leaves her true self entirely exposed to his judgment. Suddenly overwhelmed by crippling doubt, she yanks the hood back down and stammers a rapid apology, leaving Muya to politely express his profound disappointment. The swift retreat shatters the fragile intimacy they had just begun to build. Peeking out with a soft, genuine smile, she releases a melodic chuckle and whispers a heartfelt word of thanks to her earnest companion. The brilliant sparkle in her partially hidden eyes betrays her swelling joy. Muya's breath catches in his throat as a violent, thumping blush aggressively overtakes his flushed, awestruck face. He is utterly captivated by the sudden, radiant shift in her normally guarded demeanor. Staring in absolute wonder, the boy realizes with a jolt of electricity that the mysterious, sorrowful girl has finally laughed. It is a sound more beautiful than anything he has ever heard in his young life. A breathtakingly tender smile stretches across her face, illuminating the shadowy depths beneath her restrictive cowl. The heavy burden of her past seems to momentarily lift off her slender shoulders. Basking in her gentle presence, Muya reflects on the strange, overwhelming sense of peace that wraps around him whenever they are together. He silently questions the nature of this profound, blossoming affection. The two unlikely companions sit side by side against the gnarled roots of a massive tree, sharing a moment of perfect, undisturbed tranquility. The dappled sunlight dances across their resting forms, sealing them in a private sanctuary. Closing his eyes, Muya feels as though every cruel, terrible thing in the harsh world has simply vanished into thin air. It is a fleeting paradise built entirely on the warmth of her quiet company. The peaceful illusion violently shatters as heavily armored guards stomp through the underbrush, furiously demanding to know where their target has fled. The harsh crunch of their boots signals the arrival of imminent doom. Trembling with sudden panic, Muya cowers behind the tree as the aggressive strangers curse the annoying witch and plot their ruthless pursuit. The girl's expression instantly hardens into a mask of grim resignation. A terrifying, wide-eyed gaze pierces through the dense foliage, manic and desperate in its search for the hidden fugitives. The oppressive aura of the relentless hunters chokes the breathable air from the forest. Peeking around the coarse bark, Muya watches in absolute horror as the armed men march directly toward their fragile hiding spot. His pulse hammers frantically against his ribs like a trapped bird. Sinking deep into the protective shadows of her cloak, the girl's face sets into a cold, unbreakable resolve. She prepares herself for the inevitable sacrifice required to ensure the boy's survival. Abruptly standing up, she shocks Muya by firmly declaring that she must immediately leave this place. Her tone leaves absolutely no room for debate or negotiation. Instructing him to stay perfectly still until the danger passes, she promises that the hidden path will guide him safely back to his royal kingdom. She speaks with the finality of someone stepping willingly onto the executioner's block. Stumbling over his own tongue, Mia desperately cries out in a futile attempt to halt her tragic departure. The thought of losing her sends a shockwave of raw agony straight through his chest. Abandoning all caution, Mia lunges forward and tightly clamps his trembling hand around her slender, retreating arm. It is a physical manifestation of his utter refusal to be left behind. Dropping heavily to his knees in the dirt, he gazes up at her shrouded form and practically begs her not to walk away. His desperate plea echoes loudly in the quiet space before the looming storm. Caught completely off guard, the girl freezes in her tracks, her mouth falling open as she registers his fierce, unyielding grip. The sheer intensity of his devotion momentarily paralyzes her tactical retreat. Staring intensely at her obscured face, Mia realizes with crystal clarity that he simply cannot allow this extraordinary girl to vanish from his life. A newfound strength suddenly surges through his previously battered body. Hardening his heart against the encroaching fear, he makes a silent, unbreakable vow to keep her by his side no matter the deadly cost. He anchors himself to the earth, an immovable obstacle in her path of self-destruction. Gazing down at the fiercely determined boy, her stunning, multifaceted eyes reflect a turbulent ocean of shock, sorrow, and burgeoning hope. The heavy silence between them speaks louder than the approaching footsteps of their enemies. Refusing to release his desperate hold, Mia remains anchored to the ground while the girl stands frozen in a monument of indecision. The ancient tree behind them looms like a silent judge overseeing their dramatic standoff. A sudden, violent rustle in the nearby brush breaks the spell, causing the girl to sharply turn her head toward the impending threat. The time for hesitation has officially run out. Brushing a stray lock of pale hair behind her ear, she looks down at him with an expression of heartbreaking tenderness. Her defensive walls have finally crumbled, leaving only the raw truth of her affection exposed. A soft, involuntary gasp escapes her lips as the reality of their dire situation finally crashes down upon them. The shadows of the forest seem to physically lengthen and reach out for their vulnerable forms. Leaning in close, she whispers a final, soothing reassurance, begging him not to worry about the tragic fate about to unfold. Her voice is a fragile melody fighting against the rising roar of the encroaching danger. In a desperate, defining collision of souls, they throw their arms around each other, sharing one profound embrace against the rough bark of the giant tree. The world outside their sanctuary completely burns away as they hold on for dear life. Closing her eyes with a heavy heart, the girl softly whispers for him to take care of himself. The boy lets out a quiet gasp of confusion. His eyes widen in sudden shock as the reality of her parting words washes over him. A soft gasp escapes his parted lips. Trembling violently, she begs him to stay perfectly still until the incoming threat has completely passed. Her desperate plea hangs heavy in the tense air. A menacing soldier steps into view, marching purposefully toward the shrouded figure of the girl. She stands her ground, bracing for the inevitable confrontation. Triumphantly shouting into the forest, the guards announce they have finally found the elusive witch. Their hostile voices shatter the remaining peace of the woodland. Without a single moment of hesitation, a heavily armored guard violently strikes the fragile girl across the face. The brutal impact forces a pained gasp from her lips. Yanking her back with ruthless force, the soldier roughly grabs her pale hair to completely subdue her. She struggles weakly against his iron grip. Flanked by her ruthless captors, the girl is aggressively dragged away through the fading light of the forest. Her small frame is entirely dwarfed by the imposing guards. Clutching the fabric over his heart, the young boy watches in absolute horror from his hiding spot. A crushing wave of helplessness paralyzes his trembling body. Silent tears stream down his face as he helplessly witnesses the agonizing loss of his savior. His young heart shatters under the weight of his own profound weakness. The scene shifts to a grand, imposing ducal estate bathed in the cold light of the night. A concerned voice softly calls out for young Master Albert. Reflecting on his tragic past, Albert mentally tortures himself over his constant, agonizing powerlessness. The bitter memory of his weakness continues to haunt his every waking moment. Two frantic maids rush forward, completely horrified by the young master's battered and filthy appearance. They frantically demand to know where he has been and what exactly happened to him. Staring blankly at the floor, Albert is completely deaf to their panicked questions. His mind remains trapped in the traumatic echo of the dark forest. Wandering numbly through the grand halls, he wonders if being a stronger heir could have saved her life. A toxic mixture of endless regret and total helplessness consumes his soul. Years pass, transforming the once helpless boy into a tall, formidable young man draped in a dark coat. He stands in silence, carrying the heavy burden of his past into adulthood. A fierce, unyielding determination now burns brightly within his sharp, mature gaze. The painful memories have clearly forged his iron will. Striding forward with absolute purpose, he vows that mere weakness will never protect anyone he loves. He clings to the desperate hope that fate will someday reunite them. 8 long years later, the peaceful quiet of the sprawling ducal estate is gently interrupted. A polite voice echoes through the grand halls to announce a visitor. Approaching the desk, a well-dressed assistant announces he has brought a stack of additional documents for review. The relentless demands of his noble station never seem to cease. Rubbing his exhausted temples, Albert agrees that he is completely overwhelmed with his mountainous workload. His assistant sympathetically notes his apparent fatigue. Flustering defensively, Albert firmly insists that even he needs a proper break every now and then. His assistant simply chuckles, pointing out how much the young duke secretly loves his demanding job. Reflecting on his grueling journey, Albert recalls working tirelessly day and night to stabilize his struggling noble family. His relentless dedication allowed him to master his duties with astonishing speed. Unfortunately, his rapid ascent only pushed his brother Rainer further away from his own royal responsibilities. Ultimately, the shifting political tides forced Rainer to be adopted into a completely different noble family. The assistant's sudden, sharp interjection violently snaps Albert out of his deep, melancholic reverie. He blinks away the ghosts of his past to focus on the present. Handing over an official letter, the assistant proudly announces that the king is awarding Albert a prestigious Medal of Honor. This grand recognition serves as a direct reward for his brilliant, conflict-ending leadership during the recent war. Glancing up with sudden intensity, Albert listens as his assistant casually mentions the army's capture of a rare wish. A jolt of pure adrenaline instantly surges through his veins. The assistant explains that this extraordinary captive possesses miraculous healing powers and uniquely mismatched eyes. The highly specific description strikes Albert like a bolt of lightning. His breath completely catches in his throat as he frantically demands to know her exact location. The agonizing 8-year wait has instantly evaporated into thin air. In a bold, unprecedented move, Albert immediately petitioned the king to trade his precious medal for the witch's absolute protection. Miraculously, the monarch agreed to the desperate exchange. Sacrificing his highest military honor was a remarkably small price to pay to secure her safety. Through this desperate gamble, he finally carved out a path to see her once more. A luxurious royal carriage swiftly navigates the cobblestone streets, carrying them far away from the dangers of the capital. The rhythmic clatter of hooves signals the beginning of their new life together. Sitting across from the exhausted girl, Albert excitedly points out the window to show Sarah her new, permanent home. He warmly reassures her that a special, safe room has already been prepared for her comfort. Staring blankly ahead, the profoundly traumatized girl struggles to process this sudden, overwhelming shift in her reality. Her vacant expression hints at the deep psychological scars left by her captors. Tears begin to well in her beautiful eyes as his gentle promise of a peaceful life washes over her. The heavy chains of her horrific past are finally beginning to fracture. Gazing at her with boundless affection, Albert fiercely declares that his only desire is to see her genuinely smile. He completely dismisses her lost memories, caring only about her future happiness. Standing tall in the grand foyer, he makes an unbreakable, spoken vow to dedicate his life to her absolute happiness. Her name falls from his lips like a sacred prayer. Sensing her lingering anxiety, he softly urges her to completely ignore any cruel words from his estranged brother. He is determined to shield her from every possible source of pain. Looking up into his fiercely protective eyes, a profound sense of fragile hope begins to blossom in her chest. The cold numbness in her heart slowly begins to thaw. Hesitating anxiously, she softly stammers, struggling to voice the deep-seated insecurities plaguing her mind. The sudden transition to safety feels almost entirely undeserved. Haunted by the cruel echoes of her captors calling her a monster, she tearfully questions if she truly belongs in this grand estate. The heavy stigma of her magical nature continues to crush her spirit. Clutching her hands tightly together, she confesses her deep fear that harboring an enemy which will ultimately destroy his reputation. She has spent agonizing days wondering why he would take such a massive risk. Despite his swift dismissal, she tragically insists that her mere existence will undeniably become a toxic burden to his noble house. Her selfless concern for his status completely overrides her own desire for safety. Albert softly breathes her name, attempting to cut through her spiral of self-doubt while she continues to weakly protest. His unwavering gaze completely anchors her to the present moment. Abandoning all formalities, Albert firmly steps forward and pulls her fragile body into a fierce, deeply protective embrace. He surrounds her with his overwhelming warmth to physically crush her lingering doubts. Her mismatched eyes snap wide open in absolute shock as his gentle reassurance softly vibrates against her ear. The sudden, intimate contact completely short-circuits her panicked protests. Holding her tightly against his chest, he makes a solemn, unbreakable vow to defend her life at any cost. His voice is a bedrock of absolute certainty in her chaotic world. A fresh wave of hot tears immediately floods her vision as the sheer weight of his unconditional devotion finally shatters her defenses. The emotional dam she built to survive has completely burst. Burying her tear-stained face into his shoulder, she weakly questions why he is willing to sacrifice so much for her. A soft, breathless gasp escapes as she melts into his steadfast hold. Utterly overwhelmed by his fierce affection, she quietly marvels at the impossible, life-saving warmth radiating from his very soul. The tale of a once-abused young lady who unexpectedly finds herself doted upon by the Duke of a hostile nation. A comforting voice echoes in the darkness, promising to always protect her. The memory shifts to a young child praising someone for being truly amazing. Sunlight streams in as birds chirp cheerfully outside the window at exactly 2 in the afternoon, gently waking the slumbering young woman. Her eyes flutter open, revealing a gaze filled with quiet melancholy as she silently reflects on the fading vision. Sitting up in her lavish bed, she clutches her forehead in distress, wondering aloud if it was all just a dream. Touching her face with a troubled sigh, she agonizingly questions why she ever forgot about that child from her distant memories. She wistfully recalls that he was the very first person who never feared her eyes, regretting that she never even learned his name or anything else about him. The mysterious boy from her past was remarkably kind, fun, and warm, reminding her deeply of someone she knows now. The comforting warmth of that forgotten child feels strikingly identical to the gentle presence of Lord Albert. A sudden realization washes over her, leaving her breathless and wide-eyed in the quiet solitude of her grand bedroom. Later that morning, the young lady sits gracefully at her ornate vanity while her dedicated maid gently tends to her long, flowing hair. As Emma affectionately brushes the golden locks, she warmly compliments Lady Sarah's incredibly soft hair, lamenting that her own is far too stiff. Seeking some information, Sarah softly calls out to her maid, who immediately responds with a bright and attentive smile. Hesitantly voicing her lingering thoughts, Sarah politely asks Emma about Lord Albert's current age. Pausing for a brief moment of thought, the cheerful maid confidently confirms that the young master is 21 years old. The unexpected answer leaves Sarah utterly stunned, prompting a concerned Emma to ask if something is the matter. Reeling from the realization that he is older than her, Sarah quickly masks her shock by thanking Emma and brushing it off as mere curiosity. Her mind races with confusion, vividly remembering that the boy from her past definitely felt much more like a younger brother than an older one. Shaking off the perplexing temporal inconsistency, she silently convinces herself that she must simply be overthinking the hazy childhood memories. Yet, the powerful, reassuring echo of his earnest promise to always protect her continues to resonate deeply within her heart. Her gaze softens with profound emotion as the weight of that cherished memory brings a subtle, heartfelt flush to her cheeks. Though utterly bewildered by why Lord Albert values her so highly, she cannot deny the overwhelming joy blossoming inside her. Outside in the sprawling estate gardens, freshly washed laundry flutters vibrantly in the brisk, sunlit breeze. Emma cheerfully calls out to her mistress, happily noting how the beautiful weather is helping the crisp white linens dry remarkably fast. Watching the noblewoman eagerly assist with chores, Emma inwardly marvels at Sarah's incredibly kind nature while worrying if it is truly acceptable for a lady to work so hard. The tranquil afternoon is suddenly interrupted by a smooth, familiar voice curiously inquiring about their outdoor activities. Turning around in sheer surprise, they are greeted by the warm, captivating smile of Lord Albert himself. Sarah's heart immediately skips a beat at his sudden appearance, her cheeks flushing with a delicate pink hue. As he playfully questions her involvement with the laundry, Sarah nervously pivots the conversation by asking if he has already finished his official duties for the day. Emma enthusiastically chimes in to support the alibi, while Sarah humbly explains that staying entirely idle makes her feel far too uneasy. The devoted maid proudly declares that Sarah is an enormous help, playfully complaining that the young lady stubbornly refuses to rest no matter how much she begs. Amused by their charmingly earnest dynamic, the handsome Duke lets out a rich, genuine burst of laughter. Flashing an affectionate smile, he sincerely thanks Sarah for assisting the staff, affectionately noting that such humble kindness perfectly matches her character. Overcome with fond endearment, he reaches out to gently stroke her soft, silver hair in a tender gesture of praise. As he lovingly pats her head, Sarah blushes furiously, while a delighted Emma watches the romantic scene unfold with a mischievous grin. Seizing the perfect opportunity, the clever maid suddenly raises her voice to enthusiastically announce a wonderful suggestion for the pair. The grand estate boasts a breathtaking, sun-drenched courtyard adorned with intricate ironwork and an elegant, flowing stone fountain. Taking Emma's advice, the distinguished Duke and the flustered young lady now sit together at a lovely wrought iron table to enjoy a peaceful afternoon tea. Having expertly orchestrated this peaceful rendezvous by using the remaining unhung laundry as an excuse, the gleeful maid sprints off to leave them completely alone. Nervously clutching her teacup, Sarah steals a hesitant, sidelong glance at the elegant nobleman sitting quietly across from her. Observing his solemn silence, she grows deeply concerned, anxiously wondering to herself if the heavy burdens of his work have left him exhausted. Lowering his delicate teacup, he suddenly meets her worried gaze with an incredibly soft, reassuring smile that makes her breath hitch. Caught entirely off guard by his sudden, piercingly affectionate eye contact, the young lady's eyes widen in sheer, unadulterated shock. Seeing her abruptly flinch and grip her cup in panic, the bewildered Duke tilts his head in silent, genuine confusion. Overwhelmed by an inexplicable surge of intense anxiety, her heart races wildly as she frantically questions her own sudden loss of composure. As he gently calls out her name, she desperately struggles to understand why she suddenly cannot meet his gaze like she normally does. Misinterpreting her fierce blushing for lingering anxiety, he warmly assures her that she should stay comfortably in the mansion without worrying about recent turbulent events. Peering at her flushed face with absolute earnestness, he softly asks if that recent drama is the true reason behind her unusual distraction. He kindly explains that her distant expression made him assume she was troubled by the past, leaving the flustered Sarah fumbling helplessly for a coherent response. Lowering her gaze in hesitation, Sarah nervously initiates the conversation, her voice barely a whisper as she attempts to articulate her jumbled thoughts. She shyly confesses to Lord Albert that she cannot bring herself to look directly into his eyes, overwhelmed by an inexplicable vulnerability. Fearing a painful misunderstanding, she stammers out a frantic reassurance that her physical avoidance does not stem from any sort of dislike towards him. Blushing deeply and clutching her chest, the flustered young woman struggles to articulate the true nature of her overwhelming emotions. Albert remains silently attentive, his expression softening into a thoughtful contour as he absorbs her nervous and fragmented confession. Breaking the quiet tension with a gentle demeanor, he murmurs that he fully understands her delicate predicament. With unwavering focus, he boldly declares his intention to keep his own eyes locked onto her for the entire time they are together. Caught off guard by his intense vow, Sarah gasps in wide-eyed shock as a deep blush spreads across her cheeks. Leaning in dangerously close to confirm his resolve, he completely ignores her stammered protests about their sudden proximity. He gently explains that the absence of their shared gaze fills him with a profound sadness that he can no longer ignore. Resolving to bridge the emotional distance between them, Albert decides he must take the romantic initiative himself. His dark, piercing eye reflects an undeniable intensity that leaves absolutely no room for her to escape his attention. Paralyzed by the sudden closeness, Sarah's eye widens as her heart races erratically in her chest. Overwhelmed by the escalating intimacy, she abruptly stands up from the table and stammers a frantic apology. She turns away in a fluster, her breath catching as the emotional pressure of the moment reaches its peak. Refusing to let her flee from her feelings, Albert urgently calls her name and pulls her firmly back into his arms. Closing the final distance, he presses his lips to hers in a sudden, passionate kiss that silences all of her doubts. The tender embrace leaves Sarah completely breathless, her quiet gasp melting seamlessly into the intimate moment. Releasing her instantly, Albert steps back with a flushed apology while she frantically insists it is perfectly fine. Chuckling softly to break the awkwardness, he asks for forgiveness and admits his self-control entirely slipped. He playfully confesses that her adorably flustered reaction made it utterly impossible for him to resist teasing her. Stunned by his sudden shift in demeanor, Sarah looks up and questions if his romantic assault was merely a playful joke. He quickly apologizes if the stunt upset her, reassuring her that he genuinely cherishes every moment they spend together. Smiling warmly at her recovery, he points out that his bold strategy successfully got her to look directly into his eyes. He affectionately strokes her hair, enveloping her in a quiet, comforting stillness that solidifies their growing bond. Gazing at her savior, Sarah internally vows to live happily and always dedicate her efforts to helping him succeed. Meanwhile, an expansive exterior view highlights the imposing, intricate architecture of a grand estate bathed in sunlight. The romantic tension shatters immediately as an unseen attendant urgently calls out for Lord Albert from the courtyard. The servant politely announces that the carriage has been fully prepared for his immediate departure. Gripped by a sudden wave of anxiety, Sarah looks up at him and pleads to know if he is truly leaving her side so soon. The scene shifts abruptly to the imposing exterior of a stately manor house, its grand facade looming quietly under a bright sky. Inside the opulent halls, Albert sits in tense silence before quietly announcing his presence to the room. A new, imposing figure approaches from the shadows, dryly noting how much time has passed since their last encounter. The arrival smirks slightly at Albert's presence, remarking on the highly unusual nature of this unexpected visit. He coldly interrogates Albert, demanding to know the reason behind this abrupt change of heart and what exactly brought him here. Albert fixes the older man with a hardened, unyielding stare as the tension in the grand room dramatically thickens. Looming over him with an undeniable air of superiority, the dark-haired man finally addresses Albert directly as his brother. A dramatic close-up reveals the brother's shadowed, intimidating face, radiating a quiet but potent malice. The narrative pauses momentarily to present the title card for the next chapter in this unfolding family drama. Albert maintains a stoic, unflinching profile, completely refusing to be cowed by his brother's oppressive aura. The two siblings remain locked in a tense, silent standoff within the opulent and echoing hallway. Condescendingly offering a seat, the brother notes that Albert clearly came all this way with something important to say. Rejecting the false hospitality, Albert abruptly stands tall and declares his visit will be exceedingly brief. Looking his brother dead in the eye, he states plainly that he has only come to deliver a severe warning. He demands an immediate halt to the family's espionage actions, specifically citing a suspicious message recently sent to the main palace. Feigning an innocent realization, the brother laughs off the serious accusation with a dismissive and arrogant chuckle. Turning suddenly hostile, the brother mocks Albert for daring to object after abandoning his official duties to live freely. Dripping with venomous scorn, he questions how a runaway like Albert can possibly claim to serve their noble house now. He ruthlessly reminds Albert that he still diligently serves the very family that abandoned him to perish when he needed them most. An enraged speaker furiously demands to know by what right the other person speaks, aggressively labeling them an irresponsible fool. The air crackles with intense hostility as the confrontation violently escalates within the chamber. Maintaining a remarkably calm and collected demeanor, the other individual points out that absolutely nothing concerning has happened thus far. Furthermore, they firmly declare that they harbor no intention whatsoever of interfering with the established methods being employed. Completely shattering the previous calm, a voice violently asserts that the current situation represents a completely different matter entirely because it involves the which this explosive outburst dramatically shifts the tense atmosphere into one of immediate danger. Slumped heavily on an ornate sofa, a dark-haired man broods with a deeply troubled expression, lamenting that the situation is not good at all. He specifically emphasizes the inherent danger of the circumstances, noting that it is especially problematic in that specific country. Turning his penetrating gaze toward his companion, he questions if Albert truly knows the dark history of how the Witch of Relivera came to be. This sudden historical inquiry prompts a deeply confused response from Albert, who asks what he means by such a cryptic question. Delving into the grim past, he recounts a terrifying era in Relivera when a single, incredibly powerful witch plunged the entire country into a severe, devastating crisis. Consequently, the king issued a harsh decree declaring all witches to be heretics, launching a brutal witch hunt campaign that permanently branded them as hated symbols of shame and persecution. Expanding on the sheer depth of this cultural hatred, he explains that the prejudice is so extreme that if a mother gives birth to a child possessing unnatural abilities, she immediately abandons and violently rejects her own flesh and blood within that unforgiving land. Witches are universally considered to be grotesque symbols of shame and profound sources of hatred, ensuring they are mercilessly persecuted without hesitation. Glaring with intense skepticism, the man demands to know why Albert continuously goes to such extraordinary, desperate lengths to plead with the king. He fiercely questions the logic behind risking so much political capital simply to protect someone who hails from such a notoriously hostile land. Dismissing any potential excuses with a sharp, cutting wave of his hand, he firmly insists that her origins mean absolutely nothing in the grand scheme of things to him. Her very existence is an unforgivable threat because she fundamentally embodies a terrifying symbol of total destruction. Solidifying his authoritative stance, he aggressively reminds his companion that this territory belongs to them, meaning they possess the absolute right to make all the decisions. Here he clearly implies that the fate of that mysterious girl will be determined entirely by their own unyielding judgment, not by foreign sympathies. Launching a passionate defense, the opposing voice counters by highlighting that she successfully lives within the royal palace without causing any issues whatsoever. Furthermore, he emphasizes her incredibly strong work ethic, noting that she strives diligently to be highly useful without demonstrating even the slightest hint of negligence. A beautifully rendered vision of a light-haired woman with sparkling, tear-filled eyes flashes into mind, radiating a profound sense of gentle warmth and undeniable gratitude. An emotional voice fiercely declares that it is entirely thanks to her selfless actions that they are still miraculously alive today. A highly detailed, extreme close-up focuses entirely on a pair of intense, deeply expressive eyes framed by dark hair, silently conveying an ocean of unsaid sorrow. This heavy, lingering gaze visually demonstrates the complex emotional turmoil churning within the brooding man's fractured heart. Collapsing forward onto the luxurious sofa with a heavy, defeated sigh, the dark-haired man visibly struggles under the immense weight of his conflicting emotions. Standing tall behind him, the other man coldly mocks his profound vulnerability, bluntly stating how utterly foolish he is to give his fragile heart to a dangerous witch. Desperately clutching his own hands together in a white-knuckled grip, the tormented man attempts to ground himself against the surging tide of his own painful memories. With gritted teeth and a trembling voice, he desperately tries to convince himself of his own prejudiced ideology, insisting that witches can never be trusted under any circumstances. A hauntingly beautiful flashback vividly materializes, transporting the narrative to a ruined, elegantly crumbling stone archway entangled with overgrown, twisting vines. Within this sun-dappled courtyard, the dark-haired man is seen tenderly holding the hand of a radiant, light-haired woman draped in a flowing dark cloak. The perspective smoothly shifts to focus intimately on the mysterious, cloaked woman, capturing the elegant, intricate embroidery detailing the hem of her dark garments. A soft, welcoming smile graces her partially obscured face as she comfortably continues to hold his hand amidst the ancient, atmospheric ruins. The poignant memory abruptly shatters as the beautifully drawn image focuses entirely on their two hands slowly pulling apart, slipping away from one another. This heartbreaking visual perfectly encapsulates the tragic, inevitable loss of their once unbreakable connection. Standing formally apart within the dilapidated, overgrown pavilion, the young dark-haired man and the ethereal, cloaked witch face each other beneath the harsh light of day. The sprawling branches of a massive, ancient tree frame the melancholic scene, visually emphasizing the insurmountable distance that has suddenly grown between them. A wide, sweeping panoramic shot beautifully captures the two distant figures engaged in a quiet, incredibly tense conversation among the crumbling pillars and encroaching wilderness. The sheer scale of the ruined architecture dwarfs them, brilliantly reflecting the monumental societal pressures actively working to tear their relationship apart. Zooming in closely on the woman's lower face, a remarkably gentle, reassuring smile curves her lips as she softly begins to speak. Her quiet utterance of the word, "I," hangs delicately in the air, heavily loaded with unspoken promises and tragic farewells. Snapping violently back to the harsh reality of the present, an extreme close-up frames the dark-haired man's glaring, furious eyes fueled by years of suppressed trauma. He loudly screams a definitive, unwavering vow that he will absolutely never accept the presence of witches in his life. Remaining perfectly composed despite the explosive outburst, the standing man coolly addresses the emotional display with calculated, devastating logic. He bluntly points out that even if the dark-haired man vehemently raises his voice and stubbornly insists upon his hatred, the underlying truth remains entirely unchanged. Delivering a harsh, unforgiving ultimatum, the standing man firmly declares that he will not entertain any argument from someone who disgracefully abandoned his official duties. He then issues a chilling, absolute warning, promising severe consequences if the disgraced man ever attempts to harm her in any way. Angrily glaring over his shoulder with a look of pure, unadulterated venom, the seated man fiercely retaliates against the imposing threat with a dangerously low, venomous tone. He swears that if such a scenario unfolds, he will absolutely never forgive him. Having effectively delivered his crucial message, Albert abruptly turns his back on the brooding figure. Completely dismissing the hostile atmosphere in the room, he coldly states that he simply came to inform him of this non-negotiable situation and will now immediately take his leave. The scene is violently punctuated by a massive visual sound effect as a heavy set of incredibly ornate double doors slams firmly shut. This dramatic exit definitively seals the heated confrontation, completely isolating the brooding man within his own luxurious, lonely chamber. Left entirely alone in the suffocating silence, the dark-haired man stares blankly into the empty space, his visible eye clouded with deep, swirling turmoil. The heavy, oppressive quiet of the empty room brilliantly underscores his profound sense of absolute isolation and lingering, unresolved anger. The narrative smoothly transitions to an incredibly detailed establishing shot featuring a magnificent, sprawling mansion securely protected behind imposing wrought iron gates. The grand, luxurious architecture brilliantly sets the stage for a dramatic shift in tone, moving from dark political tension to high society elegance. Inside a sunlit, elegantly furnished parlor, a refined tea party is taking place, complete with a beautiful, multi-tiered tray of exquisite desserts. Lifting a delicately patterned teacup with practiced grace, a dark-haired woman casually inquires about how things have been going recently. A striking, highly detailed close-up focuses on the exquisite, intricate lacework of the dark-haired woman's dress as she delicately sips her hot tea. The deliberate, slow pacing of the visual perfectly captures the refined, suffocatingly polite atmosphere of elite aristocratic socialization. Sitting rigidly upright with a look of absolute shock, the light-haired guest stammers a highly confused W. In response to the unexpected question, she nervously attempts to clarify the vague inquiry, asking tentatively if her host is specifically referring to her developing relationship with Lord Albert. A flurry of small, frantic speech bubbles visually illustrates the light-haired girl's total social fluster. As she stumbles over her own words, she repetitively mumbles fragmented, deeply confused phrases like, "What?" and "How are things?" clearly overwhelmed by the sudden, highly personal interrogation. Observing her guest's embarrassing lack of composure, the dark-haired host sighs, bluntly noting that the girl seems incredibly slow when it comes to these delicate romantic matters. Drawing a rather harsh conclusion, she confidently assumes that there has been absolutely no significant progress between her and Lord Albert. While the oblivious guest cheerfully sips her tea, the host mentally screams in sheer frustration, aggressively calling her incredibly odd for failing to understand basic sarcasm. The host's internal monologue hilariously begs the clueless girl to become even just a tiny bit more perceptive regarding the complex social dynamics surrounding her. Rapidly calming down from her internal rant, the host gazes at the deeply innocent, unbothered girl and surprisingly softens her harsh internal judgment. She reluctantly admits to herself that it is precisely this pure, unfiltered cluelessness that makes the girl the only person she can truly forgive in this cutthroat society. Suddenly becoming highly embarrassed by her own uncharacteristic display of internal affection, the host defensively crosses her arms and aggressively looks away, shouting loudly to cover her flustered state. She frantically commands the confused girl to never mind because she absolutely didn't say anything important. Completely unfazed by the host's erratic behavior, the light-haired girl blushes softly, radiating an aura of genuine, heartwarming sincerity. With a bright, appreciative smile, she sincerely thanks her for the incredibly kind invitation, stating that being there has really made her exceptionally happy. Deflecting the deeply genuine gratitude with a casual, aristocratic laugh, the host insists she was merely bored and instructs her not to take the gesture too seriously. However, she admits she needed to make up for welcoming her improperly the last time, as such a severe social faux pas was actively damaging her esteemed family's reputation. Eagerly praising the hospitality, the light-haired girl happily agrees that the served tea is indeed very tasty. Puffing up with immense aristocratic pride, the host forcefully points her finger and loudly boasts that her family's exclusive tea is absolutely delicious. Leaning forward with a sudden, serious shift in her demeanor, the host decides to generously share some highly classified information. She explains that since the girl remains as utterly clueless as ever, she will reveal something crucial that might actually matter a great deal to her future. Caught entirely off guard by the sudden tonal shift, the light-haired girl stares with wide-eyed apprehension, nervously asking what she means. Dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, the host dramatically reveals that the upcoming topic heavily concerns the deeply guarded secrets of Lord Albert's family. Delivering a harsh but necessary reality check, the host bluntly observes that the girl clearly knows absolutely nothing about the treacherous world she inhabits. She heavily criticizes the girl for living her life in total peace, remaining dangerously, completely unaware of the complex, potentially lethal political machinations actively happening around her. Proceeding with extreme caution, the host explains that Lord Albert's family situation is notoriously complicated. Though she quickly clarifies she only knows a little bit of the truth, she firmly establishes that her limited but valuable knowledge comes directly from secret conversations she overheard from her own well-connected father. The light-haired girl physically recoils in profound shock, her eyes widening to an almost comical degree as she loudly stammers a highly confused W. The cause of her absolute bewilderment is the host's casual, earth-shattering question asking if she knew that Lord Albert actually has an older brother. Elaborating on this shocking familial revelation, the host explains that it was originally supposed to be his older brother managing all of the crucial official duties in the first place. However, at some undisclosed point, the brother completely stopped taking on any responsibilities, abruptly forcing Lord Albert to heavily shoulder all of those massive burdens in his place. Validating this unexpected succession, the host mentions that her father always firmly believed Lord Albert was far more capable and inherently suitable for the demanding leadership role. She cryptically describes the older brother as a deeply mysterious figure who is incredibly difficult to fully and accurately understand. A beautifully drawn, highly intense close-up captures the host's dark, penetrating gaze as she pauses dramatically to let the previous information sink in. Lowering her voice to an almost dangerous whisper, she deliberately shifts the heavy conversation to the even more complex, sensitive topic regarding his parents. Synthesizing all of this dangerous information, the host warns the girl that she must be incredibly careful moving forward. She astutely points out that since Lord Albert somehow allowed her to stay at the mansion, he absolutely must have put in a staggering amount of political effort to arrange such an unprecedented situation. Concluding her incredibly serious lecture, the host warns that the country is utterly filled with treacherous nobles harboring vastly different, highly dangerous goals and intentions. She explicitly cautions her against those who stubbornly cling to outdated ideals, noting that there are many powerful individuals who view people like her with nothing but pure disdain and vicious hatred. An unknown speaker gently urges someone to try their absolute best. Staring intently ahead, the blonde woman absorbs the weight of the conversation with a deeply serious expression. Holding her intricately patterned teacup close to her face, the dark-haired host silently contemplates her guest's naive nature. Resting her chin on her hand, the host playfully notes that her teasing proves there are far more devious and cruel nobles out there. The flustered blonde girl insists that Lady Layla is truly kind-hearted, prompting an exasperated thought from Layla about how easily the girl twists reality in her favor. Smiling fondly at her guest's pure innocence, Layla calls her a peculiar person and sincerely asks her to never change. The scene seamlessly transitions to the grand, peaceful exterior of the Amarond estate. A worried maid apologizes for her absence and anxiously asks if Lady Layla was bothersome, but Lady Sarah happily reassures her that she actually enjoyed herself a lot. Finding the comforting presence of her maid reassuring, Sarah suddenly remembers the tea party conversation and mentions hearing a rumor that Lord Albert has an older brother. She recalls Layla's ominous warning that his family is somewhat complicated, even though the exact details remain shrouded in mystery. Turning directly to her maid Emma, Sarah asks if the rumor about the older brother is true while internally wondering what the mysterious man looks like. Emma respectfully confirms the rumor, stating that Lord Albert indeed has a brother who is exactly 1 year older than him. Lowering her head apologetically, the maid admits she hasn't worked there long enough to meet him in person and lacks the information to give a clear answer. Relying purely on estate gossip, Emma reveals that Lord Albert and his enigmatic brother supposedly possess completely different personalities. Emma bows deeply to apologize for her lack of knowledge, prompting a flustered Sarah to wave her hands frantically and insist she completely understands. Sarah falls into deep thought, mentally contrasting Lord Albert's warm personality with the mystery of an entirely different, unknown sibling. Suddenly, both women snap their heads in confusion toward the massive grand doors as an unexpected commotion breaks the usual silence. Startled by the sudden disturbance, they nervously ask each other what could possibly be happening outside the room. Springing quickly into action, Emma instructs Lady Sarah to wait safely behind while she goes to investigate the escalating commotion. Left entirely alone in the grand hallway, Sarah stands nervously clutching her collar with a look of deep apprehension. Glancing anxiously toward the massive arched windows, she wonders what could have possibly disrupted the typically quiet mansion. Heavy, deliberate footsteps echo ominously against the floor as Sarah worries if something incredibly serious has occurred this time. A tall, imposing male figure suddenly appears in the doorway, prompting Sarah to hesitantly ask who is invading this private space. Sarah's eyes widen in sheer, unadulterated shock as she instantly recognizes the deep, commanding tone of the intruder's voice. Staring directly into the dark-haired man's intense, brooding face, she softly breathes out Lord Albert's name in pure surprise. The visual perspective shifts closely to the man's elegant cravat and broad shoulders as Sarah lets out a quiet gasp. Layla's dire warning to be cautious violently flashes through Sarah's mind as she realizes this terrifying man only bears a striking resemblance to Lord Albert. Glaring down at her with a sharp, terrifyingly cold eye, the dark-haired stranger silently demands to know who she is. The chilling memory of Lady Layla's warning about nobles harboring dangerous intentions echoes ominously as Sarah faces this intimidating newcomer alone. A final promotional message encourages readers to visit the Art Lapsa website for the latest translations and updates.